Hello and welcome to another episode of fSobriety. I am Craig Woods and this is my co-host.
Hello, I'm James Hamilton and this is my co-host.
I am Craig Woods and that was my co-host. James, how have you been?
I have been pretty good. I have finished Dark.
Wow, excellent. And how did you find it?
Well, it was on Netflix, so it was pretty easy.
Boing!
Oh, funny joke alert, pretty early in the podcast for us as well. Okay, here's the thing. I was 4 episodes from the ending with no idea of how they were going to end it, and assuming that they would not be able to wrap it up, and yet the last 2 episodes managed to wrap it up really well, and pleasantly surprised, loved the show, almost certainly going to do a start to finish rewatch of it though, because I think I must have missed a lot of stuff that happened in that show.
No, it's a pretty incredible feat they pulled off with that show. I was absolutely overwhelmed by just how perfectly they wrapped everything up. And like you say, all the way through, I found myself going, how on earth is this ever going to tie together? But a definite watermark in televisual storytelling, that show, and one I think we should probably revisit at some point on the podcast, because I think there's definitely plenty of meat to get in there in that show.
I think if they hadn't set out to specifically have it as 3 seasons, it could have easily gone 4 seasons, because I think we talked about this. The second last episode could probably have been, if not a multi-part episode, possibly another season unto itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I loved that episode, but I could have done with more of it. It's hard to say anything in that show was rushed necessarily, but I would have liked more of that episode. I could have happily had that split into 3 episodes. And the fact that the first ep was 10 episodes, and I don't know whether it was because of production costs or whatever that Netflix decided it should be 8 episode seasons from then on, or whether the creators themselves decided it should be 8 episodes. I have no idea, but I definitely think 10 episodes would have been better a season. But it's a tiny quibble. It is an amazing show. The writing on that show is breathtaking stuff.
I mean, having a quibble about a show where you wish there was more of it,
this is true.
Probably a good quibble to have. Yeah. Like, it's a good hallmark for the show itself.
Absolutely, yeah. So, meanwhile, I've been in a kind of hell zone, as you know, on the personal front. But, you know, I've been trying to get on with things, and I have been distracting myself as much as possible with good things. Did you happen to see Jessie Reyez singing the US and Canadian national anthems on the top of the CN Tower?
I did not see that.
Yeah, she did it for the NBA playoffs, and she took the knee, and she had her Justice for Breonna Taylor mask on, and so good, so good.
Can we insert heart emojis into this? Is there an audio for heart emojis that we can insert at this point?
I think it's just me going, We don't deserve Jessie. On top of that, I guess I've just been mainly coming to terms with the fact that I have actually unwittingly been cultivating a Joaquin Phoenix Joker hairstyle in lockdown. And I really feel like it's time to do something about it. In fact, you could say I have been living in a society.
Well, I went actually and got my hair cut today for the first time in 8 months.
Wowzers.
It was a weird feeling.
You've been listening to anything good this week?
Mostly this week I've been listening to the first episode of our podcast while editing it. So,
well, you're doing sterling work and I appreciate it.
Aside from that, however, I have been listening to... This isn't anything new, unfortunately, so it's not exactly finger on the pulse zeitgeist. However, given that I was binge-watching Dark, revisited a lot of Apparat's music. After all, Goodbye by Apparat is the theme tune from Dark, if anyone doesn't know that. Also, I didn't realise was used in Breaking Bad, in Gus Fring's death scene. Sorry, spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't seen Breaking Bad.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I was revisiting a lot of Apparat's music.
Good stuff. I have been digging the new Marlowe album, which is a collaboration between hip-hop producer L'Orange and MC Solon Brigham. The first album they released a couple of years ago was super fantastic, and this one is just as good. I've also been digging the new Brandy album, which is super fucking amazing.
Hold the bus. Brandy has a new album?
Yes, Brandy dropped a new album. Yeah, our first album in like almost a decade, and it is full of all the R&B lushness you could ask for. I recommend checking it out.
I can't believe Brandy has a new album. And also, are we doing a segue into fSobriety, the podcast where we discuss R&B music?
You know what, James? I think we may be.
Drop the sting.
Hello and welcome to a fresh edition of fSobriety, where we wax lyrical about how much we love some of our favourite R&B releases. James.
Yep, this is a completely different podcast from the one you were listening to moments ago. This is fSobriety. We drink, we talk about R&B music. Specifically on this episode of fSobriety, we're going to be talking about the new Brandy album.
That you did not know existed until like a minute ago.
Well, if I listened to more R&B based podcasts like this one, I would have known about it.
Well, it's a thoroughly lush album, and it's everything you could possibly want from a decade too late Brandy album, and I highly recommend it.
Does Monica feature on it at any point?
I don't think so. I only listened to it once, I'd have to go back. This is a very professional podcast.
Yeah, Sarah was playing a Brandy mix that Solange had made recently, and yeah, it reminded me that Brandy's had a heck of a lot of tunes.
Oh, for sure, yep. Anyway, so you should check that album out, and for all of you out there who are fond of an odd R&B tune or two, by all means check that out, because it is pretty great. And I think that wraps it up for today's edition of fSobriety. Thanks for joining us. Doodle pip. Oh, I tell you what, those guys who host fSobriety, they've really got it going on. They know their stuff.
There's completely different hosts of a completely different podcast.
You know what's great about that?
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that we are providing this platform for other podcasters within our own podcast. I think it's quite benevolent of us. And for any listeners out there who think you might have heard that done before on another podcast, I'm afraid you're mistaken. It's never been done. And if you're going to try and insist it has been done, I'm going to have to say, you talking some kind of smack me.
I like that. That was a subtle joke that certain elements of the audience will get and be like, oh, and certain elements of the audience will not get. And for those people, they really will think that that is an original idea that we've included in the podcast. So those are my favourite listeners. All
right, so this episode we are discussing Mr. Robot, the pilot episode, which is titled
Hello Friend .mov.
That is correct. Now, I am really excited that we are doing this, James. This is going to be the first part of our Mr. Robot Rewatch podcast, where we get to delve back into this show that we both love so much, and maybe try and rake over some of those hidden gems and hidden clues that Sam Esmail was littering along the way before we got the full revelations in the final fourth season.
Yeah, I believe that, like me, you recently rewatched episode 1.
I did, almost as if I knew we were going to be doing this podcast.
Just to refresh, you're not trying to take it from memory from the last time you watched it.
So, for those of you who are fans of Mr. Robot, which, let's be honest, that's why you're listening to this podcast. Otherwise, why are you here?
Or they might be just fans of drinking, or they might be fans of brandy. They might be fans of drinking brandy.
Nice. I like what you did there.
Thanks.
So I'm thrilled to be doing this because, as you know, I absolutely love this show. I know that you do as well, and I could revisit this show endlessly because there's just so much to enjoy, and it has such, repeat viewing value. And this is going to be a fun thing that I'm going to look forward to us doing intermittently, depending on how often we're able to do this among the other things we want to cover on this podcast. But I'm thrilled to bits to be doing this because God knows we need more brightness in our lives in this current climate.
And nothing's going to bring brightness quite like Mr. Robot.
Yes. Yep.
See, I said that jokingly. It does have some dark stuff in it. And it also has a lot of very relevant content to right now, but it also has a lot of brightness. Hey, it cheered me up watching it. So.
Yeah, same here. On a filmmaking level and everything else, it is just such a joy to re-experience this show. So yeah, looking forward to kicking this off. Before we go any further, just a couple of notes I wanted to make after our first episode. I'm going to apologise for the quality of some of my audio on that first episode. I did not have a pop shield on my microphone. I do have one now, so hopefully that will put an end to all those hard P's and hard B's that I was spitting at you all.
However, it will also put an end to any pop culture discussions we have, since we're now shielded from them using the pop shield. That is an audio engineering joke for all you audio engineers out there.
And it's one to be proud of, and I salute you.
Thanks.
Another thing I wanted to mention, I just wanted to clarify something that I said on the first episode that I was worried might be misconstrued. When I was waxing all kinds of enthusiastic about the YouTuber Bailey Sarian, who Her channel is Murder, Mystery and Makeup. If you want the details on that, please just listen to our first episode, but I highly recommend you look at her YouTube channel. It struck me that I was so excited that I perhaps did not express this properly, but I just want to make clear I was not suggesting that her channel is in any way problematic, but more just that that would be an academic debate that academics would have, that I don't have an opinion in, but I would love to spectate on, which is why I kind of referenced John Waters and J.G. Ballard, who I think would both revel in the kind of outrages and debates that are sparked when artists juxtapose the kind of mundane with the atrocious and sort of feed off that creatively. That's why I mentioned that. The only killers that Bailey is endorsing are those killer looks she's serving up with her makeup kit. I do not for a moment think she's glorifying serial killers. I just want to make that clear.
And there I'm going to put in the canned laughter and the woo sound effect, because that was a joke worthy of the canned laughter.
I also just want to clarify, makeup can be a very powerful tool to express one's autonomy, and I don't remotely think that women doing makeup tutorials is in any way bowing to the patriarchy or anything like that. That is not what I was saying there. And I definitely did not say that, but it just worried me that some people out there might cancel me in the mistaken belief that that is what I was saying. TLDR, hooray for Bailey Sarian. Go ahead, watch our channel, it's awesome. Makeup is cool, down with the patriarchy, the end.
You're uncancelable, Craig, it's fine. I'd like to go ahead and apologise for the quality of some of my chat in the first episode.
Well, if you want to keep repeating that apology, that's up to you.
However, I was going to say, I'm not promising it will get better. I'm just saying, if anyone expected better from me, that's what you have to look forward to from here on in.
All right, Mr. Robot, pilot episode. Shall we do this?
Let's do it.
But killer theme tune.
We couldn't afford the license to have the full theme tune,
so we had to do the a cappella Flying Pickets version, and you people of a certain age will definitely understand that reference. No one else. Mr. Robot, Season 1, Episode 1, Hello Friend. It was written by Sam Esmail, of course. It was directed by Niels Arden Oplev, and I'm possibly butchering his name, but he is a Danish filmmaker, probably best known for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
How many episodes of Mr. Robot did he direct?
Literally, this is the only one.
I thought so. I don't remember seeing his name popping up in the credits too often.
Interestingly, I also noticed on this rewatch, he's also credited as an executive producer on only this episode.
Oh.
So, it being a pilot episode, it was obviously produced as an independent entity before it went to series. So, I'm not sure what the connection is there, what his connection is with Sam Esmail, but presumably there is one.
Does he have some sort of connection with the Danish element of the actors?
Right, well that was going to be my next thing. I'm not entirely sure, because we do have a couple of Scandinavian cast members who are quite prominent in the show, so I'm not sure whether there is some... I tried looking that up and I couldn't find anything conclusive about that, but it's possible. It's certainly up there on my speculation-ometer.
How does it rate on the speculation-ometer?
Around a 7. So of the 45 in total episodes of Mr. Robot, this is one of only 7 not directed by Sam Esmail himself. And it's interesting that this very first episode is not directed by Sam Esmail, because as we will discuss as we get into it, a lot of the visual language and a lot of the style of the show is really solidified in this first episode, and it's definitely refined and it becomes more concrete as this first season progresses, but there's a lot of it in there already. And I know from reading about this online that it is quite widely reported that Sam Esmail was on set the entire time for season 1. So he was basically by the side of each director. So even when he wasn't directing, he was basically, I guess, making sure that he was 100% still in control of the aesthetic.
So he was basically backseat directing?
Pretty much, it seems that way, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because the first episode has so many shots in it that are unmistakably Mr. Robot shots. And I'd always wondered if maybe Sam Esmail had taken his own visual cues from that director's choices.
I think arguably there are fewer of them in this first episode than we see later, because I did watch a little bit of the next episode, and a lot of the off-center framings of characters and such that Esmail really makes his own. There's way more of it in that second episode.
Right, because the shot in Ron's coffee, the opening scene of episode 1, between Ron, as his Americanized name is, and Elliot, is pretty standard framing.
It is. It's just 2 mid-shots back and forth. And there's a lot of scenes that you could easily shoot that way in this show, but Esmail always finds a very unusual way of doing it. And perhaps not, perhaps they're wrong, perhaps Esmail would have just chosen to do it this way. But you cannot help but speculate that maybe the position of the camera would have been a bit more unusual. And I guess it all depends on how we interpret what Sam Esmail's intentions are when he does those unusual framings. Okay, so before we get into the meat of the episode itself, I just want to reiterate this is a Mr. Robot rewatch podcast. So that means we are looking at Mr. Robot again from the perspective of having consumed the entire series. So we will be spoiling literally everything. So if you have not watched all of Mr. Robot to the end, please go and do that first before listening to this podcast, because you do not want Mr. Robot spoiled. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of television. Do not spoil it for yourself.
So do not listen to this podcast unless you've watched all of Mr. Robot. Huge spoiler alert. We'll run the spoiler siren right now.
If you're hungry for Mr. Robot podcasts while you're still watching it, there are plenty of podcasts out there that were doing that work week by week, and there's a lot of them that are pretty good. My own personal top pick would be the post-show recaps podcast that was hosted by Josh Wigler and Antonio Mazzaro. That was easily my favourite one when I was watching the show week to week when it first aired. They had a lot of great analysis, a lot of great theories, really entertaining stuff. So that's the one I would recommend. Go to postshowrecaps.com and just search Mr. Robot, and you will find their archive there that's still available for streaming.
However, this is not that. We are going to be taking a deep dive into Mr. Robot as a whole, even though this podcast is primarily about episode 1. But this is a spoiler-heavy podcast for the entire series.
We will be referencing things that happen in later episodes and possibly probably the ending of Mr. Robot. So, yeah, final warning. Turn back now if you have not watched the entire series.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. If you're still with us, we assume that you've watched all of Mr. Robot. So, Craig.
Yep.
Lead us into episode 1.
So, here we go. Black screen, we hear Elliot's voice. This is fantastic. Elliot's first words to us are so good. And one of my favourite lines here is actually his second line. His first line is, "Hello, friend," and we'll get to know that refrain quite well. He then says, "Friend, that's lame." And he says, "I could give you a name, but that's a slippery slope." I love that line because now, in the context of the entire series and the ending, just how much was Sam Esmail hiding in plain sight? The fact that he has these entities that he gives names, and yet simultaneously he will not name the entity currently in control, which we later come to know as the mastermind. There's a lot at work there, and it's quite possibly I'm reading more into it than Sam intended. But having watched the final episode and then hearing him say that, yeah, your mind automatically goes there.
Yeah, I think it's essentially the mission statement of the show is in the first 5 seconds of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. The first we see of Elliot, he is on a train, and it's the first of many scenes that take place on trains. And I remember saying to you, James, quite a while ago, you could easily make a Mr. Robot drinking game. Every time a character looks paranoid on a train, just take a slug of your drink and you'll be plastered in no time. So Elliot proceeds to tell us about a secret cabal that is in control of the world and controlling all our fates. Now, the interesting thing about this is that what Elliot is describing here is really just the basic logic of capitalism, and there really isn't anything particularly secret about it. And what I like about this, and what I've always liked about it, is it gives it that kind of superhero edge. It's letting us know that this is a character who exists in a kind of hyper-real version of reality. He has a very hyper-real way of looking at things. And the show does a lot to criticise capitalism in its current form, but it never names it in anything like that prosaic a way. It always does it in these very kind of hyperbolic terms.
Well, it does take the superhero approach, even like Elliot himself says later on in the episode, "I'm only a vigilante hacker by night." Mm-hmm. And as we know later, from later on in the show itself is because Elliot literally imagined himself as a superhero vigilante hacker, and at the time it seems totally natural. First time I watched that show, it didn't seem like outlandish. It just seemed like, oh, this is how they're presenting this story. This is a hacker. He wants to bring down society.
One of the things that really struck me about this pilot, watching it again, and it's something that Sam does play with quite a bit in this first season. There is this idea that it could just as easily have been a vigilante superhero story with a hack of the week. You know, it could easily have been that. And I remember, before I ever watched this show, I remember seeing some commentary about it online, and there were people a wee bit upset that it didn't go in that direction. And I'm like, well, you got a much richer, more rewarding text in the end, so it baffles me that people were frustrated about that. But this pilot does its best at points to make you think that is what might be happening.
Do you feel like maybe a lot of people thought they were getting a slightly edgier version of Leverage? Possibly,
yeah, that's a good call.
Which, and by the way, no disrespect to Leverage, because I loved that show, but it was you know, Caper of the Week TV, whereas Mr. Robot, if someone who was watching that expected like a slightly dark Caper of the Week,
yep.
But they did not get what they wanted.
They got something that should have been more rewarding. I mean, it's a much more challenging show, but what it does is, well, we'll get into it. So, we get to Ron's coffee shop. The way we get to Ron's coffee shop is interesting because it's the first example of the actual construction of the show itself mirroring Elliot's mind. Because we have this voiceover as he's looking paranoid on the train, looking at the guys in black, and he says to himself, should have gone to Angela's party last night instead, and he trails off, and then we see him in Ron's coffee shop. And that instantly lets us know as this narrator is all over the place. It lets us know that instantly, and I think that's a clever move. I think at that point, you know, there might be some viewers who are not prepared to take that journey, and I think Sam Esmail was very deliberate, saying, no, look, this is the kind of show this is going to be. You're inside this character's head, and this character's head is a very dark and shadowy and very difficult place to kind of find your way or even know you're moving in the right direction, because even he doesn't know if he's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm not sure if at the time of the broadcast of the pilot, or even during season 1 of Mr. Robot itself, if the unreliable narrator trope was that tropey. If it was such a... I mean, nowadays there's more stuff for that. Lampshades, the fact that you've got an unreliable narrator and you have to work your way around it. There's a lot of different media where that's the central focus. Yeah. But at the time, this really was just like, okay, you're going to have to follow where Elliot's brain goes, because that's the way the story's being told. It's not just, we start here and we end here.
On a network serial drama, I don't think it's been done to this extent before, certainly. I think it definitely pushes it in that regard. So we get to Ron's coffee shop, and it's a wonderful moment when Elliot just sits down in front of Ron, the coffee shop owner. His movements are just so awkward. And one of the things that made me fall in love with this show really early was this guy's performance is just so bizarre. And he's kind of looking about, and he's got, you know, Rami Malek is gifted with certain particularly notable physical features, and those eyes, man.
Yeah.
He has a way of just making himself look so awkward and so wildly out of place in even the most mundane setting.
He is like a socially awkward Furby.
Accurate. So he proceeds to confront Ron about his secret server full of child pornography. And my favourite line in this exchange here, it's now my favourite line.
I'm just curious to see if this is the same line, because I took a note on a particular line from that exchange.
I've feeling it might be. Elliot is describing to Ron how he was able to hack him. And he says, whoever controls the exit nodes controls the traffic, making me, dramatic pause, the one in control. It's an amazing line. And in the context of how we know the show ends, and we know this is not necessarily the quote-unquote real Elliot in control. Yeah, it's an incredibly clever line.
That is not what my favourite line of that exchange was, but you saying that reminded me how good that was. I think what makes my favourite line of the exchange my favourite line is because of the musical cue that happens. It's the moment Elliot says, when he hacks people like this, he does it online, but he wanted to do this meeting in person. Yeah, and he just does this throwaway. He says, I'm trying to work on my social anxiety. And then Mac Quayle's Mr. Robot theme kicks in for the first time.
Right, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Beautiful. But that theme, which I'd say it was sparingly used, but I would also go far as to say that Mac Quayle's theme is criminally underused in the show.
I counted it is used 3 times in this episode, and this is the first time, and it's lovely the way it builds in this scene, so that when we get to the end of the scene, and Elliot says, "That's where you're wrong. I don't give a shit about money." Yeah, it reaches its crescendo at that point. It's so good, man. The filmmaking on this show, fucking hell, just so good. Another thing I love about that scene is when Ron attempts to feign concern when Elliot tells him his father has died. I really like the performance by the guy playing Ron. You see him kind of thinking, oh, maybe I can weasel my way into this guy's affections, kind of thing. And there's that real sense of desperation. It's really so well acted. This is also a good example of something Mr. Robot, I think, does incredibly well, which is it gives you exposition without you realising you've just been given exposition. Because we get, basically, Elliot here just tells us, so here's my issue, my dad is dead, the company basically killed him, I would like revenge for the company, but I can't think of any way to do that. So instead, this is how I spend my time. That's essentially what he's telling us. And that's the premise of the show as far as we need to know it at this point. And it's all right there in just a few lines. And you barely notice that you've been given that exposition. It's because the performances are so good. And the way the lines are delivered and the way the lines are written, it's top stuff. It is top stuff. But I love Elliot's line about that kind of sardonic way he says, "Dad's dead, but hey, company's fine."
Yeah, it's so good.
So the police arrive. Ron is getting arrested. Elliot makes his exit in the coolest possible fashion. And I love that we now know, okay, this guy is awkward as all hell, but man, he's also super cool.
It's a genuine superhero moment. That's possibly about as cool as Elliot is in the whole show, without having any undercurrent of there being sort of desperation about what he's doing, or of him being like really up against it. That moment is just that's his vigilante hacker alter ego at its peak, I think.
I will say one of my real love affair with Sam Esmail moments here, and there are many, listeners, I love the fact that when Elliot delivers that line, "That's where you're wrong, I don't give a shit about money," that even after watching the entire show, that still rings true. And see, when I first watched this show, because I'm so used to these kind of rebellious anti-hero narratives in kind of mainstream American culture, part of me was like, well, at some point he's probably going to have to give a shit about money. Elliot never gives a shit about money all the way to the end of the show, and I can't explain to you how thrilled that makes me that we actually got a text that maintains that level of integrity. Anyway, we go back to the train, of course, briefly, where we get the first appearance of the titular Mr. Robot, who tries to catch Elliot's attention with the words, "Exciting time in the world, kiddo. Exciting time in the world."
And a legend is born.
And a legend is born. And it's amazing how Christian Slater does so much with so little in that scene, because he is everything that character needs to be right there. Because, first of all, there is, of course, the novelty value. You know it's Christian Slater. So you're like, hey, it's Christian Slater. He must be playing a pretty cool and dangerous character. But at the same time, there's just something about that performance that it's just so... He's so full of confidence in delivering that one line, and he delivers it twice. Yeah. And it is everything he needs to say.
And his physicality is almost cartoonish as well. In that
right,
moment.
it's like Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just so entirely in control, so fully confident in who he is. And you come away from looking at that character briefly going, who the hell is that guy?
Sorry, let's take a moment. I just want to appreciate your Bugs Bunny analogy, because that's brilliant. I've never thought of that before.
Yeah, if he just pulled out a carrot from his inside pocket, the analogy would be complete and it would be perfect.
If he was like lying on Elmer Fudd's gun while saying that line. Incredible.
So after that, we get the first glimpse of Allsafe. And this is... I have to say, one of the many moments in this pilot episode, amazing world building, because we are in Allsafe for less than a minute, I think, before we even have the complete measure of what Allsafe is about. And there's so much at play here. The production design in Allsafe, everything is pale blue. The entire thing is pale blue and kind of semi-metallic. And it almost seems unreal. It seems like a place where Elliot goes and he disassociates from himself, and you really get that vibe just from the production design alone, and it's amazing. And there's something about the name of the company, Allsafe, that makes you think nothing is happening here, because nothing can happen here. It's the most prosaic environment you can imagine. So, you know, it's almost a kind of offhand, all safe.
And yet, though, as soon as he's in all safe, I feel like a lot of the time his comfort is being attacked while he's there.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is the irony of it, and we see that very quickly. I love the way we're introduced to Gideon, and again, this sort of taps into that sort of formulaic hacker vigilante hack of the week series that it might have been, because Gideon is every bit in this first scene the stereotypical boss. Elliot, get in here, fix this. Oh, you think this hack is awesome, kind of thing. And you could easily imagine this sort of thing just being repeated episode by episode ad nauseum. And the great thing about that, though, is it lets us know that that's how Elliot sees it. To him, this has been going on ad nauseum. This is the way he views this person. This is the way he views this environment. And the way the show delivers that is really pretty great. I love the guy that plays Gideon. He's everything that character needs to be. He's equal parts kind of hapless, but got a bit of an angry edge to him. Yeah, I think that actor does a great job.
Yeah, Michael Gill is excellent in the role. Because at first, like you say, he comes off as he could just be the guy in the corner, the guy in the office, like, get in my office, Elliot.
Absolutely.
But week to week, but he, even within just the space of the first episode, brings like such a likable, warm character.
Yeah. And we can also tell that even in his delivery when he's angry at Elliot, you tell there's a fondness there. Yeah. And I think it's mainly, because it's not in the dialogue, it's mainly in the performance. And you can only assume that Esmail has been in Oplev's ear to say, I'll make sure this performance is, you know, it's able to convey that. And I think Michael Gill does such a great job there. It's so good. It's these little things that this show is just full of. On the rewatch, these things are just a total joy. But there is that sort of pathetic side to Gideon as well. Like, you can tell. One of the things I've always thought about that character, he reminds me of a substitute teacher
that can't control his class.
Yeah, he's doing his best attempt at wielding authority, but there's always the smart kid in the class who's like, yeah, cool story, bro. You have no power over me, to quote Labyrinth.
Before we continue with the breakdown of this scene, though, upon rewatching, I think this is the fourth time I've watched the pilot, and I might have gone a little deep, but I don't know about you, but I kept like rewinding and trying to make a note of Elliot's employee number to see if there was some sort of hidden meaning in there,
right,
and I don't think there is. His employee number is UR280652, and I can't figure out if that is something.
It's Sam Esmail trying to deliver a message to us. You are. So he's speaking to us directly.
Yeah, as soon as I saw the UR, I was like, oh, there's something here. And then I took a note of it, and I was like, there's nothing here. Sam Esmail is just like fucking with me.
Sam is just fucking with us. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of that. So crucially here, we meet Angela. And I love the way Angela is introduced, because she could almost be nothing more than a background character at this point. And Elliot introduces us, he says, that's my childhood friend, Angela. And it's almost as if you could easily think the main part of the relationship is in the past, you know? And we do. Here's the thing I love. When I was rewatching this episode for this podcast, Elliot gives no indication that he has serious romantic feelings for Angela at all, until the scene that we're going to talk about later, when they have that hug and there's that unspoken moment before they're interrupted by the thing we'll get to. And it's interesting that Sam Esmail wrote it that way, because he gives no indication that we're supposed to think there's anything romantic between these two characters until that point. And it's because we can now look at it as that Elliot is doing his best to pretend he doesn't have these kinds of feelings because they are too difficult to deal with. Now, this is offset as well by the fact that as soon as we meet Angela, we also meet Ollie.
Which, I want to take a moment here and interject just to say that Ben Rappaport is a powerhouse actor. The guy is
great.
Incredible, because he makes Ollie the absolute worst from the second he's on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but every time I look at Ollie, even in this first introductory scene, my skin crawls, because I'm just like, man, I've known so many guys like this guy. Yeah. I've worked with several guys like this guy. Just get him out my face.
The character acting on display of just being like an inherently unlikable douchebag, but not like for any reason that he's overly offensive or anything. He's just everything about him is. You know?
It's the mannerisms and the over-enthusiastic, clearly trying to ingratiate himself with Elliot, and Elliot absolutely seeing right through it. And I love Rami Malek's performance when he says, "Big meeting today, gotta go." Yeah. And one of the great things about that is we already know Elliot is a complete oddball by this point. But that one line alone, we're 100% on Elliot's side, and Esmail does just a great job with the writing there, that no matter how weird this guy is, we're 100% in his head, on his side. That's the journey we're taking. It makes us develop a bond with Elliot, and it's just all because of what a douche Ollie is.
Shout out to Ben Rappaport for that performance.
Yeah, it's a class performance. I actually really admire actors who can play douchebags this well. I mean, who knows? Maybe a lot of actors just are douchebags. That would be such a stretch to believe. But I do think it's one of those things, an actor's whole job, obviously, is to become a different person temporarily, which is a weird way to spend your time, and certainly it must be a weird way to spend to make a living. And to just have that much relish in playing a douchebag, yeah, it's fantastic. It's just so good. And we get... part of me wishes we got more of Ollie in the series ahead, but I do think on balance we get just enough. So another line I really like here is when Angela is kind of trying to get information out of Elliot as to why he didn't turn up at her birthday party the previous night. And of course, we now know it's because he was getting Ron sent to jail, as one does. Sorry, I couldn't come to your birthday party. I was too busy busting a pedo. Doesn't say that, obviously. But I absolutely love the way Sam Esmail writes this. And I'm going to say that a lot. And I know, listen, guys, if you're going to be critical of this podcast, it's going to be, hey, that guy Craig, he just fillets Sam Esmail non-stop. Well, you're right, and I'm not going to apologise for it, because, listen, he's written the greatest piece of television, for my money, in at least the last decade, and possibly longer. So, yeah, that's going to happen. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast to hear criticisms of Mr. Robot and of Sam Esmail, you're listening to the wrong fucking podcast, my friend.
Well, actually, here's the thing. Mm-hmm. You can get them from pretty much every other Mr. Robot podcast, particularly about Season 2, which mystifies me. I don't get the hate for Season 2. But anyway, that's something I will rant about further down the line.
Yep.
So the line I like here, or rather the interjection after the line, after Angela asks Elliot this, we see what's going on in Elliot's head, and he's remembering being outside the bar looking in, and that's such a beautiful, tragic image. And he eventually just drifts off, walks away, and Angela says to him, "Stop thinking about something else." I love that, man. She has no idea. She has no idea. It's so great. It's so great and so painful, and I love it. It's a great piece of writing.
It's almost a throwaway moment, but it says so much about both characters that it's
Yeah, this show is just full of that kind of stuff. I love it, man. God, I love this show. Anyway, moving on. Our next scene is our first introduction to Krista, and Krista will go on to become quite an important character in Elliot's life. I don't know how you feel about Krista. I absolutely love her. I've always thought she's one of the strongest characters of the show. I think Gloria Rubens is amazing in the role.
I've never seen Gloria Rubens in anything that I haven't thought she's been like stellar. And
100%.
As a performer, she's brilliant. But particularly as Krista and Mr. Robot, she's one of the main pillars that elevates this show.
This show is full of actors like this that can do a lot with very little. Even in this one scene we get of Krista, in fact, we get two scenes of Krista in this episode. But this scene here, she has so little in terms of actual content, but she does so much with it. It's great acting. She's able to convey so much. You can tell that she's genuinely concerned about Elliot. We know from Krista, this is not just a job. She genuinely cares about her patients. And further into the scene, Elliot even says that aloud. He's noticed this too, and he knows this. And this is going to be important because Krista becomes a confidant for him, and this is a big deal for Elliot because he won't trust anyone to open up to. So we know that Krista's a big deal. One of my favourite things in this scene, and it's not something I appreciated properly, I don't think, until my rewatch of it yesterday. Mm-hmm. The level of detail when we see the flashes of Krista's dating profiles.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so good.
I don't know about you, but when I was rewatching it specifically for the purposes of doing this episode of the podcast, anytime there was text on a screen, mm-hmm. I paused it and read it.
Same. one of my favourite wee details in this is on her profile, there's no fewer than 3 pictures that are basically the same picture, but just cropped and rotated slightly differently. And I'm like, that is classic. That is how a middle-aged person uses social media. I just thought that was a fantastic detail. Krista is going out with a guy called Michael, and we know this because Elliot tells us, because he has hacked Krista, because he hacks everyone. And Elliot's key line here is that Michael is scratching that part of his mind that doesn't allow good to exist. I love that. I've always loved that whole idea about Elliot, is that he just has that thing in his mind that will not let things be normal. And having seen the entirety of Mr. Robot, that is actually something that's just very common in people who are dealing with trauma. They're always instantly looking for the traps in anything that seems pleasant, anything that seems welcoming, anything that seems comfortable. They're automatically looking for, well, where are the traps?
Yeah.
And really looking at this now, we should have been saying, why does he feel that way? I mean, it's cool that he does. It's his spidey sense. It's his hacker vigilante hero super sense.
Yeah, it's his superhero power, but it's also, to a degree, I think, it's the mastermind. The whole reason the mastermind exists is to root out the bad. So anytime that's probably another side of the explanation as to why he has that part of his brain that can't
absolutely.
let it be.
And the whole point of the mastermind is it embodies, more than anything else, Elliot's anger about what happened to him, and thus his anger. Because Elliot's an empath, he feels for other people. And so it's his anger about what might be happening to other people. And it's very, very true psychologically to people who have gone through that kind of trauma, that this is something they just experience on a daily basis, that they cannot allow themselves to be fully content in any situation because they're always expecting that there's something sinister behind it. And of course, the way this show often works is that it sort of justifies Elliot's cynicism constantly, because it tells us, well, there was a reason to be suspicious, because it turns out Michael was a bit of an arsehole, and it turns out Michael has been slinging it about. And furthermore, as we will learn much later in the episode, Michael is not even Michael.
Michael is a guy who's shit to his dog as well. It sinks the boot in to his character by saying he's all of this and he's bad to animals.
Absolutely, and that I like it. That is one of those Hollywood ways that it's a shorthand for letting you know a guy is a piece of shit. Is he mean to animals? Yes. Well, fuck that guy. And I feel like what I like about that is when we finally see Michael with Flipper, it's after we already know this stuff about him. So it's almost like Sam Esmail saying, "Yeah, I know this is a trope, but hey, we know the guy's a piece of shit. Of course, he's going to be abusive to animals."
Yeah.
I like the knowing level of that. So I don't know about you, right? See, when you were watching the show the first time round, the way in which it deals with Elliot's anger issues and the reasons for Elliot being assigned to Krista in the first place, it keeps us in the dark. Really keeps us in the dark. We don't even learn until a point in season 2 and a flashback why Elliot was sent to Krista.
Yeah, the information regarding that is so sparing. She just says one little line about him dealing with his rage, and then it goes no further into it. You're just like, okay, I guess he has anger issues.
I think what always fascinated me about this before any of the revelations was, well, we know Elliot's a complex guy. We know he has certain anxieties, all that stuff. We don't actually very often in season 1 anyway see him be outwardly angry. That's not something we see of him very often. So the fact that he was sent to Krista for anger issues was something that used to gnaw away at me. I was like, well, that's not really the thing that I would characterise Elliot as. I would characterise him as anxious, depressed, lonely, angry, maybe from time to time, but it's not the thing I would characterise as. I don't know how Sam Esmail got away with this because that strung me along for so long, and I was like, but what's the deal with the anger issues? What's going on there? And season after season, even after the end of season 3, I still didn't have an answer. And I was like, but where does all the anger come from? I mean, I get, obviously he's passionate about what he's doing, but he's passionate about his view of the world. Sure, there's an element of anger there, obviously. But we don't see very many instances of him outwardly enacting anger. We don't see him get enraged very often. And that was something that just gnawed away at me for ages. And it's so cool now, knowing how the show ends, looking at this again, going, yeah, of course, this all adds up now. Everything falls into place.
At the time of first watching it, though, I think, unlike you, I kind of bought into it hook, line, and sinker, that his anger was just his anger at the world. Like, the whole monologue where it has the flashes of, like, Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, and he says fuck society twice during that scene. He says it kind of quietly and then more aggressively towards the end. And I think first time I watched it, I bought into it. It was like, okay, this is his anger. Cool, he's angry at the world.
I agree. I think that's why it works. And I think that's why, on a writing level, Sam Esmail was able to conceal the true nature of Elliot's anger for so long. Because that stuff is so convincing. And it is clear Elliot is genuine about this. These aren't things he's just made up as a deflection. He is genuinely passionate about these things. And the more passionate you are politically, yeah, in certain circumstances you do get angry. And I'm going to say, as someone who sympathises with Elliot's worldview to a large extent, if not a 100% extent, only because this is a side issue, but only because Elliot isn't particularly politically developed. He's not, he's not following any particular ideology per se. But nonetheless, he is essentially enacting an anti-capitalist mission, even if he never actually comes out and calls it that. Although, interestingly, Mr. Robot comes closer to calling it that.
He almost like as much says it in the first episode.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. We get this trick again that Esmail does in the writing where Elliot has that big speech, but then it turns out not to have been a speech. and Chris actually says, "You're not saying anything." And you're like, fuck.
Yeah, that's such a good moment.
It's a great moment because you're like, what in this show is real?
And it's the way, like, Rami Malek, the way he just sort of sits there awkwardly when it cuts back to what has actually happened. Like, he doesn't look remotely, he doesn't have like an ounce of that rage. He just sits kind of like that daydreaming off into space look. It's just
100%. And on a retrospective level, I love the fact that you really see the mastermind in Rami Malek's mannerisms come to the fore here, because you do see him getting that bit more agitated, that bit more venomous in his delivery of his words. You're like, oh yeah, that's the mastermind in full control of the thoughts there. It's great stuff, and I love the subtlety in Rami Malek's performance there. And again, one can only assume there was certain notes in the script or maybe notes on set that he had to deliver that in a certain way. But the shift in tone is just so good. And after Krista says you're not saying anything, Elliot immediately becomes a wee bit meeker. And the shift in demeanour it's subtle, but it's powerful stuff. It's great stuff. It's top acting.
I was going to say, he's a good actor, that Rami.
Turns out he's not bad at the acting. Yeah, I think he's going to go far, that guy.
I hope some people recognise his acting ability in future and he gets some film roles.
I have a feeling he'll do well in some Oscar bait biopic at some point. Another line I really like here is when Elliot just has that offhand lie about how he went to Angela's party and he got a girl's number and she likes the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
And you see Krista's kind of, wait a second.
Yeah.
I mean, Krista's no dummy. We get to know that Krista is definitely noticed that. And she has that line where she says, and it's a great line now, and for so many reasons now, looking back, knowing how the show ends, when you hide, your delusions come back. And it's a great fucking line. Because at this point, when you're watching season 1 the first time, we think his delusions are nothing more than he's been followed by Men in Black. When in actual fact, oh my god, he has a legion of delusions. And I like the way he says, the meds are working. Which meds is he talking about? Well, we're going to find out later. So after that, we go back to All Safe. Ollie tries to ingratiate himself to Elliot once again. This is comedy gold. It's just so fucking good. We get Elliot's inner monologue of how he hacked Ollie. And my favourite detail of this, and it makes me laugh aloud every single time, Ollie's password is literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but the 7 is spelled out in letters as if that'll get them. Amazing. And Elliot asks us, am I crazy not to like this guy?
The music of Josh Groban and Maroon 5.
Yeah, and the speeches of George W. Bush. It's just magnificent.
This also has one of my favourite lines in the episode where Ollie says to Elliot, I just don't want it to be awkward between us. And Elliot says, just pure, like, casually, like, yeah, I'm okay with it being awkward. That delivery is comedy gold.
But even better, Ben Rappaport's comeback of, yeah, I'm not. It's just amazing. Another thing I love about this, we find out Elliot's reason for not telling Angela. Elliot rationalises it by saying, well, Angela has shitty taste in men and I'm not ready to see what comes next yet. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like I've been there.
Ollie's the asshole buffer, right? He's like the buffer between Angela and the guy who's worse than Ollie.
He's the asshole I could just about handle at this point in time. Yeah, great stuff. So after this, we get the first sight of Elliot's apartment. And Elliot's apartment is one of my favourite sets on this show. Is there only one window in Elliot's apartment? I can only see one window. I was looking at this against, like, how many windows are there? I was like, I think we only ever really see one. Maybe there's a hint of another one.
Is there? I don't know if there's one in the kitchen.
There may be a narrow one in the kitchen. That's true. Kitchenette, rather, because it is all one room essentially. Just
to imagine though, right? It's a small. It's essentially like a bed set, right? It's a small bed set. Imagine how much he's paying in rent for that in fucking New York City.
I know. That did cross my mind consciously as I was watching it this time. Because now that I know the full story and I've got time to kind of immerse myself in these tiny details, I was like, how much are you paying in rent, Elliot? Because whatever it is, it's not fucking worth it, mate.
Yeah, I know Angela says that it's a bad neighbourhood.
I love that line. Yeah, I'm going to mention that line later for a different reason, actually.
Like, a studio apartment in a bad neighbourhood in New York is still a fucking expensive apartment.
Yeah, totally. The colour palette in Elliot's apartment is notable because it's the first time, really, we get kind of earthy tones. We've not had much of that so far, apart from like the natural exterior architecture in New York City. There is a bit of it in there, but Elliot's apartment is full of earthy tones. There's a lot of shadow, and it really it's just that classic case of, it's that expressionistic filmmaking technique of just having the protagonist's living space mirror their psyche. But it's nicely done, and it's not overdone. This is the kind of thing, if it was directed by David Lynch, there'd probably a fucking decapitated angel hanging upside down,
And all the windows would be vertical slits.
Right, and they'd face onto brick walls. Sam Esmail doesn't go that far, but there's just enough of that expressionistic vibe that it's kind of cool. It reminds me, I know it's like, this is such a cliche thing to say about any kind of experimental or bold audacious filmmaking of any kind, but it does have a European vibe. It reminded me a lot of like watching Tarkovsky whenever I see that set. So we only get a brief interlude here about Elliot's apartment. There isn't that much of it at this point. We then get Elliot gives us another monologue about his kind of overall philosophical view of things. Here we get this monologue here really ups the ante in terms of the possible vigilante hero hacker of the week drama that it might have been, because he then gives us the spiel about E-Core, how I only ever hear it as Evil Core, and of course a great device that the show uses from then on. We only ever hear it as Evil Core from then on. And he does actually unironically just come out and say it's a conglomerate of evil. And conglomerate of evil just reminds me of something Stan Lee would have written in 1965. This week, the Avengers face the conglomerate of evil, drawn by Jack Kirby. We segue very naturally from that back into the following day at E-Core. Excuse me, at Allsafe, rather. We get the visit from E-Core. Terry Colby turns up with his entourage of douchebags. One of them will become important in a little bit. And I love Elliot's observation about Terry Colby. He's a CTO and he uses a fucking BlackBerry.
Yeah. When the people from Evil Corp come in to Allsafe for the first time, though, it's in the middle of a voiceover from Elliot. Mm-hmm. And he says the words, I noticed this, like, I don't know if this was deliberate or if it's... I'm assuming everything that happens in this show is specific and deliberate. Mm-hmm. But when he says the words really bad guy is the first time we see Tyrell.
You're right, yes, that's true. I noted that as well. Yeah. Really bad guy, and there's your Tyrell. What's funny about that, though, and it's something we're going to discuss in detail as we go through this rewatch, and however long it takes us, man, is Tyrell quote unquote a really bad guy, because for some weird reason, for reasons that I still have not been able to quite figure out, Sam Esmail does his best to make Tyrell a really complicated character. And we will definitely be talking about this further down the line. But now, Tyrell is a bad guy, don't get me wrong. But to introduce him as nothing more than the bad guy, I feel like was a deliberate bait and switch by Sam Esmail. He was letting us think that this guy was going to be just a villain. And while he is a villain, he's so much more. Tyrell's such a great character.
The way they introduce Tyrell is like he's like Bizarro Elliot. Yeah. Everything he talks about, all the tech stuff, just seems like, oh, he's like Elliot, but he's like the fashionable male equivalent evil corporate Elliot.
Yeah, he's the Armani Elliot. And I think it's entirely appropriate to think of him that way, because Tyrell, as we know in the final season, comes to think of himself that way, which is such a great turnaround, which it's part of the writing I loved in the final season. Yeah, it's an amazing piece of characterization with Tyrell, and he's what I love most about that character, actually, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we are talking about this in the context of the entire series, so I think it's fine to talk about this. Tyrell is a super complex character, and one of the main reasons he's so complex is that his purpose remains kind of opaque all the way through. And I have seen and I'm sure you've seen it as well. When you go to any Mr. Robot fan page or fan group or anything online, there is always the question that comes up: what was the point of Tyrell?
Oh right, that's not the question I thought you were going to say.
No, there are various other. I know. Oh right, no, I know the one you're thinking. I'll come to. Yes, I'll come to that in a second. That one drives me insane. But a lot of people don't understand what was the point of Tyrell, because what was his journey, really? And again, this is something we will revisit, so I'm not going to get into too much detail about this at the moment, but one of the things that makes, for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think Tyrell is such an indispensable part of the Mr. Robot entire mythos, if you like, is because he exemplifies, among other things, the idea that powerful people are not safe in this world. And Tyrell is a powerful person, but he's a powerful person who yearns even more power, and he's never quite able to get it, and he'll do it any way he can. He gets so desperate that he convinces himself that he and Elliot must be linked in some way, because to his credit, Tyrell is correct in recognising Elliot's brilliance, and he tries to turn that to his own advantage. But where he falls down is he internalizes this myth about he and Elliot being brothers in some way, which Elliot, it seems, never subscribes to. And for all that Tyrell is severely inhuman and almost fucking reptilian in some ways, the really human thing about Tyrell is the way he is rejected by Elliot. And that's like literally the worst thing that happens to Tyrell. If we're talking about a guy who loses his wife and child, but the worst thing that happens to Tyrell is that the guy he invested in, this myth that he'd built around himself and who he saw as his god brother, Elliot did not believe and was not interested in. And that's what kills Tyrell. That's actually what kills Tyrell in the end. Because when Tyrell dies in season 4, you know beforehand he's already lost all hope. And it's because he's finally admitted himself that Elliot rejects that myth. And I think that's an amazing piece of characterization.
Yeah, he's ready to let himself die in the woods.
Absolutely.
Before the actual moment of him being shot because of that. I felt so bad for him. You forget all the reprehensible things he's done.
Tyrell is fucking horrible. He's horrible. He's a horrible person. But yes, I agree. There was a part of me was like, oh. And at the same time saying to myself, what the fuck he taught this guy's dreadful. He's the worst possible human being. But Sam Esmail has done such a great job of making me think I should have some sympathy for this character that I just can't escape it. I still come away going, yeah, there's a part of me that feels bad for this psychopathic, misogynistic, murdering arsehole. So anyway, moving on. Tyrell predicts Elliot's thought. Sam Esmail lets us know there is some kind of connection between those two characters. There is some level on which both these characters are playing the same sport in a sense, albeit they're playing by entirely different rules. And I love the fact it's about Linux. I know what you're thinking, why am I even using Linux? So while all this is going down, Elliot's giving us, he's continuing with his inner monologue. I like here, it's interesting, he uses the term the invisible hand, because he's talking about capitalism essentially, or if he's not talking about capitalism, he's possibly, you could argue, talking in a more general sense about how all part of our culture now that we all live with are guiding us to behave in ways that are not beneficial to our well-being essentially. And that's a nice turnaround from what the phrase the invisible hand actually means in classical capitalist literature. The phrase the invisible hand, I don't know if you know where that originally comes from.
I don't.
It was originally coined by Adam Smith, who is generally regarded as the father of modern capitalism. But it was used to refer basically to the way in which a person's selfish impulses can have positive effects on the wider community. And that is how Adam Smith envisioned capitalism. So in very simple terms, a landlord or mill owner or whatever would see their own needs and say, well, I need this to be done so that I can do such and such. So therefore, I will pay these people to do such and such. They will then take that money, they will spend it elsewhere because of their personal need. And basically it was just a poetic way of framing the way the early capitalists saw as being the benefits of capitalism, that it basically creates a healthy economy because of people's inherent self-interest.
All right.
But what's cool about the way Elliot uses it, he turns it around, and without giving it the name capitalism, Sam Esmail is definitely making us think about capitalism, because he is using the phrase the invisible hand deliberately. Elliot is using the phrase the invisible hand in an entirely different way, that the invisible hand is instead guiding us to behave in ways which do not benefit us. And it's only because we have no choice, because we're under a system that demands we work jobs to earn money, to survive, but encourages to internalize this myth that it is supposed to be good, when in actual fact the invisible hand is putting the vast majority of that money in the pockets of people who do literally nothing. And it's the people at the top of that mountain. It's people like Philip Price, who we won't meet at all for another few episodes yet. But yeah, I think it's a nice piece. It's a nice, I love that Sam Esmail put that phrase in there. It's a great example of the way in which this show really critiques capitalism without really hammering it on the head of, mentioning the word capitalism too often. Because this show actually doesn't mention that word very often at all. And I think it's perhaps a product of it being an American show, where Americans culturally, and I'm sorry Americans listen to this if I offend you by saying this, but the way you guys treat capitalism is insane to the rest of us outside of North America, because critiquing capitalism is something we do on the daily, and you don't need to be a socialist to do it.
I was going to say, this is not technically a communist podcast,
yeah,
but we can critique capitalism.
I'll openly come out and say I am a socialist, and I'm sorry if that offends anyone. If you want to stop listening now because you don't want to listen to any mad commie in your ears,
I'm not sorry if you're offended by that. Go and fuck yourself. Okay, right. That was just for anyone who was offended by
you
socialism.
don't need to be a socialist in other countries outside of the USA to critique capitalism. It's not seen as a crazy thing to do, to critique capitalism. The ways in which capitalism is treated in American popular culture has always been quite comical to me. And so I think Sam Esmail does a good job of critiquing it openly just enough.
Just enough that USA Network will broadcast it?
Right, yeah, and getting the point across. And the use of the phrase the invisible hand here, I think, it's a fine sleight of hand. It's a fine sleight of hand. Okay, so we then go back to Elliot's apartment. Now, Elliot here, he gets very, very confessional with us at this point. He starts to describe how alone he is. I like the way he describes himself as anonymous. And I say that now as someone who has seen the entire series. The way that when I was watching this time round for the purpose of this rewatch, it does seem to me this is another representation of the mastermind at this point. The mastermind feels anonymous because the mastermind will not name itself as the mastermind. I also like, he says, if it weren't for QWERTY, I'd be completely empty. And on the surface, he's referring to his pet fish. But he's also referring to the fact that he spends his entire life at the computer, and if it weren't for that, he'd be completely empty.
Also, at that point in the episode, he doesn't specifically reference that his pet fish is called QWERTY. He happens to be feeding it at the time of that line, but the first time I watched it, I didn't pick up on that and thought he was talking about his computer.
Yeah, I think it is easy to miss. It's easy to miss.
It wasn't till later in the episode when Angela asks how QWERTY is. Yeah.
My fucking God, I cannot say enough good things about Rami Malek's performance in this scene when he's doing the crying. I feel the pain of that scene every fucking time. He looks like a person in absolute misery, and it's a great performance. And I think the fact we don't hear him sobbing makes it more powerful, makes it more painful. I hate when I can't hold in my loneliness, he says. What do normal people do when they get this sad? The crying has been happening more often lately. Now, several things go through my mind now, knowing how the series ends. I hate when I can't hold in my loneliness. I feel like he's also referring to the fact that he's banished most of his real self, and that his real self is on some level fighting to get back out. And that adds an extra layer of kind of melodrama to this scene now. And it's not like this scene needed any more fucking melodrama. It's a painful scene to watch anyway, but on the rewatch now, I'm like, Sam, what are you doing to us, man?
Yeah, it reveals so much on a rewatch once you've seen the entire series as a whole. When you rewatch that scene, the mastermind is rage, and it's what's controlling Elliot, but at the same time, it's doing it by suppressing all the parts of Elliot that would need to maybe not handle that level of loneliness, but prevent that level of loneliness.
Yeah, I mean, it is natural for people who suffer from chronic depression to have bouts of crying from time to time. Not to get too personal, I know how that feels, but I do think the line where he says it's happening more often lately, there's nothing to substantiate that any further, really, in this season. So I do think that's kind of one of Sam Esmail's early clues, even though it's one that nobody would ever pick up on. I think it's the quote unquote real Elliot, all the stuff he's kind of suppressing that he's put in that loop that he's putting back in. He's kind of trying to get out, and he's missing that stuff. He's missing the optimism because he's banished that part of himself. It's really tragic. It's really, man, I did find that really affecting when I watched it this time, and it's always been affecting, but this time I was like, yeah, God, yeah. There's so much of Elliot's repression of himself in this scene. It's really, really kind of painful. So yeah, and he then has the line where he says, what do normal people do? Well, they reach out to friends or family, and we have that first flash of the mother's abuse. Now, there's so much to say about his mother's abuse, because how much of that was actually the mother and how much of it was the father. This is one of the things Sam Esmail has left us to think about, because he never confirms it. It's quite possible both parents were abusive, just in different ways, or it could be possible that Elliot has just transposed all of the bad stuff onto one parent so that he can keep one parent as a kind of healthy icon, as it were. It's not unusual for people who suffer trauma to do that kind of thing. We don't know, and I love the fact we don't know. I love the fact that for all of the stuff that Sam Esmail explained in season 4, there's a whole bunch he didn't give the answers to that he's left us to wonder about, and that's one of the things I do wonder about. My sense is the mother was abusive.
I think clearly his mother was abusive, but probably not to the point that he remembers, because all of the negativity of his parents, or both, I think, or that the mastermind's willing to let him know, are placed on the mother figure. You know, she is basically, she's an avatar for all of his childhood abuse that he is aware of at the time.
Yeah. So Elliot is unable to reach out to friends or family. He can't even phone a friend, as Chris Tarrant would have said, or indeed as Savannah would sing. You don't get that reference, James, because you don't dig reggae.
Oh, hang on a second. Have we got into an episode of fSobriety?
James, I think you're right.
Give us some reggae! Give us some reggae!
Hello and welcome to a fresh edition of fSobriety, the show where I, Craig Woods, Attempt to inculcate James Hamilton into a fondness for reggae, to which he is very resistant. Is that true, James?
Yes, I am currently very resistant to reggae. Anyone who listened to the first episode of the podcast, fSobriety, will be aware that despite me claiming to have quite a broad spectrum of musical taste, I have never been able to get into reggae.
Well, let's see if we can break down that wall between you and the reggae goodness. So my plan, James, is to try and bit by bit just ease you in. Now I know you have said in the past you don't mind a bit of dancehall, you don't mind a bit of dub.
Yep.
I know your fondness for R&B.
Yep.
So I'm going to try and ease you in. I'm going to try and ease you in with something I think, let's take it slow. So first up is Savannah. Savannah is a contemporary Jamaican dancehall / lovers rock / reggae / Jamaican R&B singer-songwriter. I don't see why you wouldn't dig this. So I'm going to use this as the first stepping stone on this journey, which you, my friend, should be excited to take.
All right.
I've just sent you a little link there.
Oh,
if you click on that.
It's coming through. Yep, I have it now. It's arrived.
So this is Phone a Friend, the aforementioned Phone a Friend by Savannah. And this is a killer tune.
All right.
Get it in your lug holes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we are unable to bring you this song, Phone a Friend by Savannah. Rest assured that even though you are listening to two men make comments about bees over an otherwise awkward silence, Craig and James were at the time listening to and watching the video for the song. In order to avoid repeated interruptions to your listening, it is worth noting that this applies to Craig's second song choice as well. Apart from the bit about the bees, obviously. We encourage you, the listener, to check the songs out and support the artist. Now, back to our regularly scheduled reggae-based podcast within a Mr. Robot episode analysis podcast.
Bees, planes. Yep.
It's a good video. How you feeling so far?
It doesn't strike me as reggae-ish particularly so far.
See, that's what you think. But let's get into it. Let's get into it.
It's got the halftime reggae groove on.
It does. Yeah. So we're getting it. We're getting there now. She's swinging her hips. Go Savannah. Bees. So for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to with the bees, by all means, do a YouTube of Savannah, Phone a Friend. Great song, great video.
We've got the upstroke guitar. That's a classic reggae one.
Absolutely, yep. It's a very typical reggae kind of rhythm. So how are you digging this?
I must be honest. Unlike what she just said there, I do quite like this.
There you go. I knew it. Yeah. See. Now, to be fair, this is essentially an R&B song that has a reggae flavour. But this is my way of just drifting you in slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great tune. She's an amazing artist, Savannah. I'm quite fond of her to a large degree.
Savannah gets the thumbs up from me there, yeah.
As long as you like the likes of Georgia Smith, or as I know you do.
We both saw Georgia Smith.
There's no reason why you wouldn't like that. And if Georgia Smith were to introduce a reggae rhythm, that's essentially what this is. So here's what's going to happen, James.
Yep.
You quite enjoyed that one, so I'm going to send you another Savannah track.
Savannah is going to get 2 thumbs up from me for the track Phone a Friend.
Excellent.
Excellent.
So I'm going to send you another one.
So this is coming through now. Holland Pool.
This one is called Hall and Pool.
Not Hall and Oates.
Listen to that.
I know a lot of people who listened to our last episode will be disappointed that there's no Hall and Oates. Actually, they won't, because I edited out the Hall and Oates part of the last episode.
Damn it, James!
But if I hadn't, it would have fitted in really beautifully with this.
This song has such an amazing groove. If you don't enjoy this, quite honestly, you have no soul, my friend. You are bereft of a soul.
Indignation Collective presents.
Indignation Collective, who are a great bunch of artists.
A great bunch
beyond Jamaica.
A great bunch of lads.
Well, more ladies, but carry on. You do you.
Okay, so I'm going to play this and we'll have a listen. This is Savannah with Hall and Pool. Okay, immediately, this is more like traditional reggae.
It does, yep. How are you feeling? How are you enjoying this journey? Are you feeling queasy? Are you feeling okay?
It's more traditional. Not gonna lie, the groove is nice. I'm more impressed though by the syncopation of her vocals in relation to the drums.
Right, okay. Yeah, I get that. Go on.
What it has is some oddly placed crash cymbals. And I'm struggling with the oddly placed crash cymbals.
Really? Interesting. But you didn't hate it.
I didn't hate it. I wouldn't request it be turned off. Honestly, I don't think that would have been played at Ska Sunday.
Right, yeah, no, well, that's fair. But as I said, we are easing you towards that. So this is my plan, James. As long as you enjoyed it, if someone asked you, as I am asking you, there's no need for the someone. I am the someone. Did you enjoy that second track, James?
Yes, I did.
There we go, I knew it. Yes!
However,
2-0 to Woodsy.
I enjoyed Phone a Friend much more than I enjoyed Holland Pool.
As I predicted. But you did enjoy the second one, so we're getting somewhere. And that track was significantly more towards the roots reggae end than it was dancehall.
Yep. It was a little more upbeat than I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, those Jamaicans, they're famous for the very downbeat tunes.
Sorry, I misspoke. I meant it was more up-tempo.
Up-tempo, yes. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I will grant you, Savannah's voice does a lot of the work. She has a very infectious voice, and as you heard from the first track, she's got a really good R&B style voice. So that's why I deliberately chose her as the first artist to on which to kind of push you off on this little journey. So it's going to get more difficult from here on in, but I would say it sounds like you're largely positive on this experience, chalking that up as a win. And that has been another edition of fSobriety.
Give us a reggae! Give us a reggae!
Well, I tell you what, that was a killer episode of fSobriety. I don't know who those guys are who host that podcast, but they do a fine job.
One of them definitely knows a lot about reggae music, and the other guy sounds like he's, a really open-minded music fan.
No. Again, I have to salute ourselves for allowing this outlet for other podcasts to do their thing in the body of our podcast.
A completely original idea, yeah.
I'd have to reiterate, if you think you've heard that before on another podcast, and I'd have to suggest, maybe ask more like ask, are you talking some kind of shit to my talking shit mouth? So Elliot then proceeds to tell us about his morphine habit. Now, this is full of good stuff. And there is some really clever writing in this part. The level of denial here is just amazing. Elliot tells us the key to doing morphine successfully is to do it without being a junkie. Which, even as a line in itself, is so ludicrous. It's fucking amazing. And he tells us he's measured it out exactly how to not be a junkie. And even first time around watching this, I was 100% hashtag cool story, bro. But he goes out of his way to tell us how he's got a backup that he will only use in emergencies. And then the very next time we get a sharp cut to him suddenly looking up and going, shit, out again.
Yeah, that's amazing.
The level of self-deception there is so good. And I like that there's already been enough of that in this pilot episode as it is, but it does add an extra layer of, okay, this guy is not 100% on the level, It's a nice bit of writing where we're like, okay, we definitely cannot trust this guy, but he's the only narrator we've got, so I guess we've got to run with it.
Yeah, his plans do not go well.
We then get introduced to Shayla.
Sorry, can we take a moment to have the heart emojis again?
Of course. So Shayla, this is a nice characterization here. This is another character. There's many in this show. Characters who just leap off the screen as soon as they appear. And Shayla is a great supporting character. It's actually kind of crazy we don't get her past the first season because she seems so real and absolutely fully formed in my head, and we hardly get that much of her. But it's such a well-written character. I think Frankie Shaw does a great job in the role. But basically, pretty much Shayla's first line almost is she wants to give Elliot the morphine on the house.
Is it not the stuff that he uses to bring him down off the morphine
yes, sorry,
withdrawal?
I beg your pardon. Yeah. Yes, sorry, not the morphine. Yeah, you're right. I did a misspeak, but yeah, it tells us so much about these two characters in this moment, that she's happy to be way more open, and you get the sense that Elliot would like to be more open, but he's just not able to do it. And I love Elliot's line here where he says, "This is just a normal drug deal."
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah.
Sheila then says, "I tried to give you a shout on Facebook, but I couldn't find you. Now, you know why this is making me laugh." Elliot says, "I hate Facebook." Sheila says, "That's crazy." And the reason I'm laughing is because quite some time ago, I looked up Sam Esmail on Facebook, and I sent a screenshot to James of his last ever public post on Facebook was, and I quote, "Wow, people still use Facebook?" ? And it was from like 2012, and he had never posted since. So I love that shit. I love the full-on integrity from the character of Elliot to the real-life man of Sam Esmail. So Elliot makes the leave. Sheila says, "How about we just do some Molly?" Elliot closes the door. We then get Elliot waking up next to sleeping Sheila, smoking the blunt and saying, "Don't ever make decisions on morphine."
You know, it's almost like a very special episode of Mr. Robot. That's life advice that anyone can get behind. Never make decisions while you're on morphine.
So, while Sheila is still asleep, hacker vigilante Super Elliot gets up, restless, decides to go back to his mission of sorting out the situation between Krista and Michael.
Here's a moment, sorry, that I'd like to interrupt with
go on.
An observation that I made. He checks his phone because he gets a check-in.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that Elliot Alderson is the only character in mainstream TV or film that I've ever seen who has a cracked phone.
Right. Uh-huh.
His phone screen is a bit fucked.
It is, you're right.
It just adds a bit of realism to his character.
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious thing about it being a reflection of his own cracked psyche and all that stuff. We don't know enough about Elliot yet, though, to make that connection. So it is an interesting choice. It's a good call. It's good detail. So he goes to the restaurant where he knows Krista is having dinner with Michael. He sees a couple of men in black outside the restaurant, which is kind of solidifying that whole thing that Krista mentioned earlier. The great thing about this is it all turns out to be a massive red herring, because the men in black just are not important to the story at all.
They're just men who happen to be wearing black at any given time.
Literally just a couple of guys outside the restaurant. And if they are looking at Elliot, it's because Elliot's a bit fucking weird, guys. I don't know if you've noticed it, but he acts a bit strange.
He's a bit shifty. He's got a hoodie pulled up. He's got those Furby saucer eyes.
Yo, Elliot, y'all ever tried some of that self-awareness from time to time? Maybe that's why they're looking at you. So he's waiting for Michael to leave. Mr. Robot appears, the second appearance of Christian Slater, looking for change as though he is just some kind of homeless person. I love this appearance. It's great. It's classic Christian Slater in the delivery. Now, I don't know if you were able to pick up the exact dialogue that Christian Slater says here, because it is quite low in the mix.
I was laughing.
Cannot pick it out.
I was laughing
Same.
too much.
Every time I see it, I just laugh, because it's like, oh, there's Christian Slater doing a classic, a Jurassic Christian Slater, or a classic Christian Slater, if one prefers. And interestingly, here's a good example of the way Sam Esmail plays with not only the tools of filmmaking, but even the cliches of cinema. Because we turn away from Mr. Robot at the Men in Black because Elliot draws his attention away. And when he draws attention back to the table, Mr. Robot is gone. Now, when you first watch this, you're like, oh, well, that's just a classic, where has that character gone? Obviously, we're just meant to think that guy's a bit mysterious. But now we know Mr. Robot isn't real. So he was never there, and it's a mad the way that when you watch this on a rewatch, it just completely alters the way you look at it. It's like Sam Esmail was deliberately using that cliche in a way that actually benefited the way he was telling his story. He was masking the fact that this character wasn't ever real, But the fact that there's a nice dichotomy, there's a nice almost kind of irony that he makes the character disappear mysteriously, but because we've seen characters disappear mysteriously in exactly that way, we actually don't think it's that mysterious. So we just don't think about it, we don't question it, and it's not now you look back and go, well, of course he disappeared because he was never actually there. So Elliot, he phones the taxi company when he notices Michael get into the taxi, so he's able to track Michael to his apartment building. He gets there, and we get to the aforementioned scene of Michael just being a complete prick to Flipper the dog. So if there was ever any doubt that Michael was an absolute walloper, we are 100% on board that Michael is a walloper train now. To those of you who are not Scottish, a walloper is a dickhead, asshole, whatever pejorative you want to put in.
So Michael here is being a penis. He's being a giant penis to Flipper.
Elliot does a top textbook hacker job here on Michael. He says he needs to use his phone to phone his mother. Of course, he's just phoning his own phone, so he has Michael's phone number. It's a nice little detail because we just see the phone in Elliot's back pocket flashing. It's a nice little moment. So we know Elliot's done that. Okay, so from there, we then segue back from that plot back to the evil core plot. Now this is where things start to get, as they say, real. Elliot's called in the middle of the night because there's been another hack on eCore. This one way more seriously. So Elliot turns up at the Allsafe office. Angela's there. She's very worried because she thinks this is going to reflect badly on her because this account is her responsibility. Lloyd is there. Shout out to Lloyd, one of my favourite undersung supporting characters. He has some of the best lines. Elliot asks what's happening. Lloyd replies, well, somebody's just finger blasting the network. He specifies that it's a rootkit in the servers. Angela asks, what's a rootkit? To which Lloyd tactfully replies, it's like a serial rapist with a really big dick.
Angela's response to that is brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, she's just so appalled. Like, Lloyd! Absolutely magnificent. So, Elliot quickly diagnoses what's happening here. A number of things happening here. The script is letting us know just how good Elliot is at recognising and diagnosing these kind of things. He knows his business. If we didn't know that before, it's at this point we know, okay, this guy is fucking good. He's able to look at what's happening here. He understands immediately what's happening. My favourite line at this point, when he explains how the rootkit is working, he uses the line, by defending ourselves, we spread the virus everywhere. Yeah. And it's only now I look back on that and think, well, this is also a comment on the way in which Elliot, his own psyche, is defending itself by just spreading new versions of himself. Mm-hmm. Again, it's another retroactive fucking genius moment of writing by Sam. And I'm like, fuck you, Sam, you're too good. So, Gideon appears, all irate substitute teacher, insists that Elliot accompanies him on the jet to Dallas. Now, I have to say, the first couple of times I saw this episode, I think I just didn't really take in the fact that they were jetting to Dallas.
Yep.
Which is on the opposite side of the fucking country. Mm-hmm. And the USA is a massive country. I think the first few times I watched this, I just wasn't taking that on board.
That's a long-ass fucking flight.
Yes, yeah. So they're making super speed.
Yep.
But yeah, it wasn't until this rewatch I was like, that is a hell of a long flight. And it shows you how desperate Gideon is, because obviously this client is the biggest possible client you could have. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is at this point, if you're keeping score, if you're the kind of viewer that's really paying attention and processing all these details, we know that Allsafe isn't a massive company. It's relatively small fry. So why in the ever-loving fuck do they have such a massive client that they have to go all the way to a server farm in Dallas, Texas from New York? It suddenly dawns on you that, holy shit, this is a small company that's really having to pull out the stops to deal with this massive conglomerate. It's at this point, I do feel like Sam was telling us very early on, listen guys, there's something weird about this setup. Why would this massive conglomerate choose this tiny company? And I'll admit, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it back in the day. It's only now on the rewatches I'm like, I should have been asking questions about this because it does not make sense.
But see, at the same time, though, it also undermines your thinking of that because although Allsafe is a very small company compared to Ecor, they have a private jet at their disposal.
No, I don't think they do have a private jet. The private jet is Ecor's jet. It's given to Allsafe. I mean, Gideon knows that he can get on that jet because the CTO, Terry Colby, will have said to him, you know, if there's ever a problem, the server farm, you need to go there, you can use the jet. It's definitely not Allsafe's jet. There's no way it's Allsafe's jet.
I assumed it was Allsafe's jet.
I think in my early watches I assumed that as well because I just wasn't thinking about it because I was too engrossed in what was going on in Elliot's head. But it's only now I'm like, no, that's Ecor's jet. I mean, Allsafe can't. Why would Allsafe have it? That does not make any sense. Ecor have that jet and they've facilitated it. If I'd realised that, if I'd consciously thought about that earlier on, I would have probably gone further down the road of wondering why in the ever-loving fuck a massive conglomerate like Ecor would be using a small fry company like Allsafe. And again, full credit to Mr. Esmail. We do not even get the answer to that until season 3. It's crazy. And the whole time I just was not questioning it.
I'm currently tweeting Sam Esmail to ask if that's Allsafe's or Ecor's jet.
I don't see how it can be Allsafe's jet. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It would have to be Ecor's jet. Ecor would at least have to have given them it and said, this is, you know, if there's ever a problem at the server farm, you know, the jet's there. Yeah. I don't see how it would work any other way. Okay, so they jet off to Dallas. Something I noted here on the rewatch this week. I think this is the first instance we get of Elliot repeating mantras to himself. Yep. So when he gets to Dallas and he's trying to sort this out, he starts doing that. You got this. You got this. You got this. You got this. This becomes more of a thing as the series goes on. What made me really notice it was, again, and not to get too personal, I know from having done cognitive behavioral therapy, this is something that people who have been through trauma are trained to do. So one of the things you do to kind of bolster your confidence and kind of get yourself over the obstacles that you've identified in your life, the things you know are a challenge, is to repeat to yourself, make these things into mantras to make yourself stronger. And it's a cliche because people do it even without knowing what CBT is, right? Yep. There's people that do that. In CBT, it is something you are told that it does help. It does help you bolster your confidence. And it's exactly what Elliot is doing here. And it did make me think in the rewatch, is this something he's picked up from Trista? Mm-hmm. It's a small detail, but it's something I noticed this time around. Elliot identifies the infected server. He finds the data file with the label fSobriety and the message, leave me here. Elliot finds he cannot delete it. He wants it to stay. He asks, what is wrong with me? Now, see on the rewatch, man, I'm now saying to myself, how did I not question this more? Are you the same?
It seems screamingly obvious on a rewatch why he won't delete it.
Absolutely. But I think when I first watched this show, you know, the writing did such a good job of making me think that Elliot was already so very much on a journey where he wanted to kind of tear things down, that I was like, well, that's the only reason. That's it. It's fine. But there is a leap involved there. There is a bit of a leap, really, because he's got no reason to think that the people who have had Ecor are doing it for any benevolent reason. There's no reason to think of that at this point. It could just be mischief makers who are in it for their own gain.
On first watch, retrospectively, by the end of the episode, or by later in the episode at least I should say, it sort of bluffed its way into making me believe that he was doing it for, if not altruistic reasons, that he was leaving it there for sort of anarchic reasons, because of when he swaps the files over before he gives the files to the FBI. That whole scene. But it's like it does a bait and switch again with the information it gives you, whereas on the rewatch you're like, oh yeah, clearly you're responsible for this rootkit.
Yep. It's one of those things that, you know what's weird about it? It's one of those things that even on the rewatch, it still works the original way as well. Yeah. I don't know how Sam Esmail did that. It's the writing is just so good, it's crazy. But anyway, he doesn't delete it. He rewrites it. He rewrites the root directory so that only he has access to it so that he can analyze it later. He and Gideon get back on the jet. One of my favourite scenes here. Gideon, after all of this, who's so relieved because, you know, if this company leaves Allsafe, they're fucked, basically. So Elliot's just saved him. Elliot's a superhero as far as he's concerned. And so Gideon now has this moment like, I love this guy. And he's like, I'm just going to come out. It's like, do you know I'm gay? Rami Malek's fucking reaction is so amazing. It's the delivery. What Gideon tells him, I feel like I can talk to you. And Elliot says, thanks. And there's an implied question mark at the end of thanks. It's so good. Gideon tells him that Ecor were already thinking about leaving, that he's heard that through the grapevine, so clear, we already know there's a bit of tumult going on at Ecor at this point. Gideon says here, there's someone there that likes us, and it's amazing now when I look at that now that was Esmail already planting Philip Price into the story at this point, and that's the only reason that they're still there. Gideon basically says that here, which I thought was interesting to note. He then says to Elliot, in a strange way, I think you'll be happy if we go under. And it's interesting the way Elliot reacts to that. You can tell he's got just enough respect for Gideon that he does not want to admit that might be true. And he says to Gideon, I promise I'll find them. And it's at this point, if you're watching this the first time round, it's like, if this is the hacker vigilante hacker of the week story, it's like, okay, this is going to be Elliot's mission for the next couple of episodes. And it's like, what would that alternate show look like? It would be super formulaic, but it might still be fun.
Man, I don't care. I would watch the shit out of that.
I would watch
Hack
the
of the
shit out
Week
of
show.
it as well. I mean, what we got was way richer and way more rewarding, but yeah, no, there's a part of me that's still like, yeah, I'd still watch that.
I want to see Gideon and Elliot jetting off to like exotic locales where there's server farms, you know, like the server farm in Hawaii. Let's go.
The server farm in the Antarctic is there's something definitely wrong. Then they encounter John Carpenter's The Thing. If Alan Moore was writing it as an installment of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that's probably how it would go down. Okay, so they return to New York. When Elliot gets back to New York, daylight is beckoning. He goes into the subway. We get the first glimpse of a villains poster. I love these posters.
Yeah.
Evil always wins. I love that shit. This is great stuff. This is great world building by Sam Esmail here. I think what I like about this is that even on the rewatch, I'm still not sure if these posters are real.
And it's right next to the Ecor poster as well.
Exactly.
It basically says to look at it next to each other. It's just villains, Ecor.
Yeah.
So good.
Yes, yeah. And it's on the rewatch, it seems as subtle as a sledgehammer.
Yeah, it's not so much lampshading it as it is halogen spotlight on the situation.
Yeah, it's great stuff. So Elliot's on his way home. Mr. Robot gets on the train, tells him, you should come with me, but only if you didn't delete it. Now, on the rewatch, what I started thinking about here, because I cannot help it, knowing how the series ends, everything Mr. Robot says and does here now, from here on in, I'm going to be thinking about what is Mr. Robot's rationale.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know Mr. Robot, the whole reason Mr. Robot exists is to protect Elliot.
Yep.
That does not necessarily mean protecting the mastermind, although there are areas of crossover. And this is what I love most about this show. If I had to pick one thing, this is it. Because this is so complex. Because there are definitely times where Mr. Robot is aiding and abetting in the mastermind. And there are definitely moments where Mr. Robot is being an antagonist to the mastermind. And it's all because he wants to get, quote unquote, the real Elliot out of where he is. And can I be honest, even I watched the fourth season the first time, loved it all the way through. But when I learned the rationale, I was like, does that totally work though? And now that I'm rewatching it, I'm like,
yep.
Fucking does work.
It does.
It totally works. It totally works. Because at this point, Mr. Robot is stepping in to kind of make sure that the mastermind's anger is directed at the right target. Because Mr. Robot wants the biggest target possible. Because he knows that's the only way to get the mastermind to fulfill the mastermind's mission. If he lets the mastermind just do the hacker of the week thing,
then the mastermind will be there forever.
There'd never be an end to it, exactly. So he's got to go for the biggest target. It's fucking incredible how perfectly this all works, man. It's insane.
And he says to Elliot, or he says to the mastermind, I guess, that line, you're in prison, Elliot, but I'm going to break you out.
Yes, yeah.
Like,
I this time watching that on the rewatch, I jumped out my seat at this point on the rewatch this week, because I was like, fuck. Because that can mean so many things. Because yes, he is talking to the real Elliot. I'm going to break you out. But he's also talking to the mastermind. Because he's getting the mastermind to fulfill the actual mastermind's potential. Because why does the mastermind exist if not for this? You know, the mastermind is the vehicle of anger. It does nonetheless have, in a way, the same goal as Mr. Robot. Because the only reason the anger exists is because of Elliot's feelings that he wasn't able to protect himself enough. And we see Elliot's guilt about that in season 4 when he's faced with his younger self. So it works on all levels, and I'm like, I cannot believe how perfectly this was written from the start. It's I've got Sam Esmail's dick down my throat. I don't care. It's going to keep happening. Again, reminder, if that's not what you're into, I'm sorry, this is the kind of pornography you're going to get in your ears from now on. Me filleting Sam Esmail all the way.
With a pop shield this time. You'll hear it in the best possible quality.
Another great detail here. I don't know how you felt about this when you were watching the 4th season, or in fact, even any of the seasons post season 1. Looking back at how Mr. Robot talks about his dad in inverted commas.
Yeah.
Now we know that can't be a real person, right? Because Mr. Robot does not fucking exist. And Mr. Robot, if he is anything, is the ideal personification of Elliot's father, right? So who is the petty thief dad? Now, I have some theories about this, and I'll let you come back and see what you think. But when I was thinking about this on the rewatch this week, is it possible Edward Alderson's dad was a petty thief, and that Elliot got some wind of this through his father at some point? Or is this just a kind of pulp story that seems sort of relevant to the vigilante super hacker? Is it that? I don't know, and I still don't have an answer. I don't have a concrete answer for this.
My understanding, or my belief, my reading of it is that Elliot's grandfather must have been a sort of petty thief or something, and he has at least some sort of nugget of information about that, enough to build it into this fake story. Given that Mr. Robot represents his protector father figure that he never had, then if Mr. Robot is talking about his father, it's probably in some way Elliot's granddad. But again, this is purely conjecture on my part. I don't know if it's just a complete throw off the scent pulp storytelling element.
It inevitably has to be conjecture. Sam Esmail has definitely written it that way. There's no way we can know for sure because he never confirms it. So it's one of those things we're left to kind of dangle with. I guess it's one of those things where you just choose the interpretation that works best for you. I'm not sure what mine is, because I do think that's kind of cool if the grandfather was that kind of character, and that Elliot has just subconsciously rewritten that, but just erased enough of it from the mastermind's consciousness that this seems like new information. That makes sense. It does make sense. Or it could just be a made-up story that just chimes with the mastermind's whole kind of vigilante hacker shtick. I think it works either way. It's really impossible to know. And Sam Esmail clearly doesn't want us to know for sure. He wants us to speculate about it and come up with our own conclusion about it. So, but yeah, definitely on this rewatch, I was like, no, he went out of his way almost not to give an explanation for this, which I think is one of the few areas where there are few areas where Mr. Robot does not give concrete answers, but all of them are very crucial. They're all in crucial areas where your mind cannot help but keep going back there. I think it's what makes this show. It's got a perfect balance of giving you enough information to be satisfied with what the story was, but also having enough kind of springboards for your imagination to really kind of wander around and find your own answers. And I love the fact we don't know the concrete answer to this. This is one of those areas where on the online fan communities there's a lot of frustration about. There's a lot of Reddit threads about, but what was fucking Edward Alderson's father? I mean, this only works if you assume that Mr. Robot's father is Edward Alderson's father. You know, they may not necessarily be the same thing, because Mr. Robot is not Edward Alderson. Alright, anyway, moving on. Mr. Robot takes Elliot to Coney Island to fund society, which, for me, remains one of the best visual puns in any TV show's mythos here. I love this style. F society, fuck society, it was fun society. I love this, man. I love it so much. Have you ever been to New York, James?
I have been to New York, yes. I've never been to Coney Island.
Right, I did go to Coney Island, and I love the atmosphere in Coney Island. And Coney Island is one of those magical places that it still has a present, it's still a thing, but it has a glorious past, and the ghost of that past is everywhere. And Mr. Robot does a great job of capturing the idea of the ghost of that past. And for me, the whole idea of fun society, just missing those two letters, it's so true. It's so true to the actual physical space that where this is set, as well as just being a great pun, and also just filling out the world of this show. It's a work of genius. I love this whole thing. The whole thing about F Society being sitting here in New York's biggest fun fair is for me one of the best metaphors in this show. I love it every time I see it. It's just so fucking good.
It adds so much to the idea of the vigilante hacker superhero story having a base of operations in a disused fun fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's as pulp as it gets.
Now, I will say here, and it's something I've noticed in all the rewatches I've done post season 1, when we go to F Society, Romero opens the door. He does not look Mr. Robot in the eye. He looks Elliot in the eye.
Yep.
And to this day, I consider myself a massive fucking idiot for not having noticed that no one looks Mr. Robot in the eye, and I don't know how I never noticed that.
Here's the thing about that scene. I don't know if you noticed on the rewatch. That was clearly a reshoot when he looks him in the eye, because when Romero lets him in, they enter F Society, and Romero's a different actor.
For anybody listening to this who doesn't know, the actor who originally played Romero in the pilot, and bearing in mind the way that pilot episodes work, they're basically shot like movies, and then, you know, they're sent to the network and they're optioned, and so therefore a lot of things change between pilot and series. And one of the things that changed here was the casting was different. Romero was in the original pilot a white guy.
He was played by a certain famous actor's brother.
Correct, yeah. Michael Buscemi, who is the brother of Steve Buscemi, and who by all accounts is a pretty decent actor. Like, I've actually seen him in a couple of things. He's actually pretty decent. But yeah, it was originally shot with Michael Buscemi in that role. Now, this is one of the things I wonder about, because Sam Esmail, obviously, when it was going to series, he rejigged quite a few things to make sure it was going in the right direction. He decided to make Romero a black guy. I don't see how that could be an accident. He must have chose a black actor because he felt that was more suitable for the role. Now, whether that came at the script writing stage and he felt the casting was wrong and he wanted to correct it, or whether he later thought that this character should be black, I don't know. But the fact that Romero is a black guy going forward, to me it feels relevant, because I feel like the energy that Ron Cephas Jones brings to that character is really vital to that character. He's a great actor. I love that guy. I love watching him in anything. When he turned up in Luke Cage, I jumped out of my seat. I was like, I fucking love this guy. He's so good. And he brings a certain kind of black authenticity to his roles. And there's no way Sam Esmail cast him in this role without being aware of that. And I feel like there was a certain amount of correction was going on after this went to series. How that ever got cast as a white actor, I don't know. It would be interesting to see. We'll never know, I suppose. We'll never know. But it's interesting to think about. Michael Buscemi, though, fine actor, but it wasn't to be. Now, here's the thing. Back in the days when I first watched this show, if I'd had any conception of who Carly Chaikin was, I would have been asking questions at this point. Because I'd be like, why was she second in the cast list? Because we barely even see her in this.
It's 44 minutes into the episode where Carly, the Queen Chaikin, as I've written down here, appears on screen.
James is, in fact, referring here to the first scene where Carly, the Queen Chaikin, has dialogue, and not, in fact, to the scene here in question, but the combination of beer and rose-tinted spectacles make it difficult to reference your notes.
So yeah.
All we see is her looking a bit sort of like, what the fuck are you doing at Elliot? Which, on first watch, is like, okay, she's clearly thinking, who the fuck is this guy that Mr. Robot has brought in? Whereas in all the rewatches, now we know she's thinking,
what is my brother doing?
absolutely. I don't think I appreciated the first few watch-arounds of this first episode, but I do appreciate it now. Carly Chaikin is already super tuned into the character of Darlene, because she's playing it as if, dude, fucking get a grip. And you can see that in every line of her face. It's like, why are you just kind of wandering around looking lost? What's happening here? So many of the scenes in this show just gain an entirely different meaning when you watch it on the rewatch. Another thing I want to mention here regards casting, different Mobley, and I did not notice that until fairly recently. He's so far in the background, he does look similar enough that it's not too jarring. It's only when you're looking for it, really, do you're like, that's not Mobley. The actor who we came to know as Mobley is Azar Khan, who's an Indian American actor, another Asian actor, and I do feel like Sam Esmail is doing his best to kind of ethnically diversify fSobriety. So it does seem like a very deliberate choice there. It's not just the fact that, you know, Azar Khan did a great job as Mobley. I think he was looking to ethnically diversify the cast, and I think it works. One of the things that Esmail does great in the writing of this series is introducing these elements without making a big deal about them. For example, with the character of Trenton, we don't get any mention of the fact of anything about her background until season 3, and it's post her death, and it's only then that it becomes relevant. Before that, we're left to just interpret it for ourselves. I think it's just testament to the way that Sam Esmail writes this show, that he wanted these things to be visible rather than be part of the exposition. He didn't want to just come out and say, this is this, that is that person is this. He wanted us to just observe these characters. And it was after we had observed them that the things, like for example in season 3 episode 8, which is one of my all-time favourite episodes of the series, the stuff that gets said about Trenton, it's like, yeah, this is exactly what I was thinking about that character. And it's like, you didn't need to tell me that, but now that you're saying it, it feels rewarding because I want to mourn the character. That's an example of really skillful writing that Sam Esmail does a lot in this show. To be honest, the biggest example of this is Elliot himself, because Sam Esmail, of course, he's Egyptian American. Rami Malek is Egyptian American. Elliot's ethnicity is never mentioned in the show at all, and we are just to infer that, well, we just come to know that Elliot is mixed race. Anyway, we have segued again.
So, moving on with the episode.
Mr. Robot reveals the DDoS attack on Evil Core was Elliot's test, in a sense. Now, what's interesting about this on the rewatch is I think it's also the Mastermind's test. Mr. Robot wants to make sure that this other personality has the gumption to actually go through with what he says he wants to go through with. Because otherwise, Mr. Robot's alternate plan might be he might need to destroy this other personality. And I think we see that conflict quite a bit, and that's a large part of season 2, really, is the conflict between the two characters. We do not come to understand the context of that conflict until season 4, really. But looking back on it now, that seems to be what it was. He wants to make sure that this version of Elliot can do what he says he wants to do. And that was something that really smacked me in the face when I watched it this week. It's like, okay, no, Mr. Robot is fucking serious. He's going to go through with this because he feels like that's the thing the mastermind needs to do, because he will fulfill his potential that way. And if he fulfills his potential, it means we'll see what we saw at the end. The real Elliot will be able to come back out. Elliot returns to his apartment. I love this monologue. He starts to doubt everything he's seen. He says, that was the delusion, surely. Is this a delusion? Are you a delusion? I created you. I didn't create this. So many layers of irony now looking back at this. While Elliot gets back to his flat, he finds Angela waiting outside. Angela says, thought you might want to relax. What's your favourite movie? First mention here of Back to the Future Part 2. I had forgotten it was right in the very first episode. So we know that's Elliot's favourite movie. Angela says, you live in a bad neighbourhood, do you know that? And now I'm thinking, yeah, that neighbourhood is Elliot's fucking head. That is the worst neighbourhood. That's where he's living. And I feel like now that's what Sam was trying to tell us. I love the line where Elliot tries to fob her off by saying, I fell asleep on the train. Angela says, that sounds like such a lie. but fobs it off.
Do you know, her delivery of that line is so beautiful.
It's great, yeah. It lets us know that he's done this before. And that Angela knows that he's done this before. So there's always been this element of Elliot that's, you know, he's off doing things that nobody really understands what it's all about, but he's doing something. They get in there. Sheila, of course, is still there from the night before, because we forget it's only one night that's passed. I love the exchange here with Angela. I love the awkwardness of it, and I love how nice Angela is about this, because Elliot's like, it's not like that, and Angela's very genuine. She says, maybe it should be.
Yeah.
You know? And we get that sense that Angela genuinely wants him to be happy. It's like, maybe it should be. Just run with it, Elliot. Just let yourself be happy. Which, on the rewatch, I will say particularly makes it really fucking harsh when Elliot makes Sheila leave. Because I'm like, oh, Elliot, you're doing yourself no favours here, buddy.
The passive-aggressive door slam to wake her up is particularly...
Yeah.
mean-spirited. That's the mastermind right there. He's like, no, get fucking out.
100%. We don't have time for these trivialities. We've got to get down to business.
Yep.
So as soon as Sheila leaves, we get down to that business. Elliot starts searching for fSobriety online. I've written down here in caps, theme, exclamation mark.
Yep.
I love how this actually mirrors that episode towards the end of the final season where Elliot is hacking himself. Because this is essentially the same thing. This is Elliot hacking himself, because he is fSobriety. And I love also, he's uncovering details about the mysterious history of Fun Society. Fun Society is one of my favourite things in this show, because we never get the full story of it.
We only get fragments. Like in that episode, you see the news story about the owner being killed, and it's like during a spate of killings in Coney Island.
Yeah,
normally there's one murder every 6 months or something, I think it says.
Sam teases us with this idea that it might be some kind of area where the veil between the worlds is thin and whatnot, but he never commits to it, and I love that. I think he does just enough work there to make that work. And Elliot, this is Elliot. The first hint we get of it is Elliot trying to find information about it, and there's obviously the information is so sketchy. And he says about Mr. Robot, this guy is good, not realising, of course, he's talking about himself. So he compiles a dossier on what he has about fSobriety. He then, the next day, goes back to Fun Society to confront Mr. Robot, to basically tell him this. Darlene is standing at the door, looking super cool as fuck in her leopard skin coat, I must say. He says to her, where's your boss? I love Darlene's reaction to this, where she just laughs and says, okay, just fucking knock it off, alright? It's like, rewrite the fucking data file and let me have access to it. And she thinks Elliot's just being a dick. And she walks off and says, alright, whatever, dickhead. Mr. Robot appears. Mr. Elliot's first line is, she just called me a dickhead. And Mr. Robot says, yeah, that's Darlene. And the reason I love that is because having grown up with, albeit an older sister, this rings true on so many levels. This is peak sibling shit. We then have the iconic Ferris wheel scene. Man, Jesus, there's so much to say about this scene. This scene is amazing. The writing in this scene, fucking hell. Man, you know what? See, on the rewatch of this, I went into this thinking that surely I'll be able to pick flaws here where he did not get it quite right, and maybe he oversold or undersold certain aspects of it. Man, it's perfect. Every line of it is perfect. Mr. Robot says to Elliot, you sense something wrong with the world. I mean, I almost don't need to say anything. There's so many meanings to that sentence. He also says, we are on the verge of taking down this virtual reality, ostensibly talking about global capitalism. Also, of course, now, as we realise, talking about the mastermind's commandeering of Elliot's reality. That's fucking amazing. The writing is so good. Elliot's resistant. He says, well, this isn't going to work. You're just going to create another financial meltdown. Mr. Robot says, no, we're going to erase all debt. There's no paper records of most of this stuff. He uses the phrase, which we will see again, biggest incident of wealth redistribution in history. And can I just say, once again, how fucking thrilled I am to live in an era where we actually saw this phrase being used unironically by main characters in the show who were not the villains.
Yep.
I just can't believe it happened.
The scene for me bears a lot of similarities to the scene in The Matrix where Neo meets Morpheus. Even like a lot of the phrasing of the sentences is almost really similar. Like you feel like there's something wrong with the world and you can't explain it.
Yep.
I don't know. I wonder if that was like a deliberate nod.
I feel
to
like
that.
it probably was. I feel it probably was. Yeah, that was an additional pull to get people into the ID he was shooting for there. He tells Elliot to put Terry Colby's IP address in the data file. Elliot is resistant to this, that Colby's an idiot and nobody's going to believe this. It's just not going to work. Mr. Robot, and now, again, another line I fucking love here. Mr. Robot says, "You don't kill a conglomerate by shooting at its heart. Conglomerates do not have hearts." It's such a simple sentiment, but it's such a great line.
I wrote that line down
so
too.
Good.
That was perfect.
It's so good. Also, we're going to be doing this a lot over our future rewatch of Mr. Robot. Shout out to Christian Slater. His delivery of these lines. Christian Slater is so well cast in this role for so many reasons, but it's perfect on a number of levels. On the one hand, there's the Gen Xers, like ourselves, who recognise Christian Slater as one of our own. And so we always associate him with that kind of era of rebellion.
Yeah, that sort of anarchic character that he
Absolutely.
tended to play in the 80s, yeah.
Yes, so we're all about, yeah, fucking listen to this guy. This guy's got it going on. But Slater's delivery of these lines is 100% non-ironic. He's 100% serious. He's more serious than probably I've seen Christian Slater in most things. And it's like, oh, this is Christian Slater grown up. We're fucking doing this for real, guys. And it's like, when I first watched this, I was like, oh, yeah, this is the shit I wanted when I was like 15, 16. And now it's happening for real. I just could not possibly, intellectualize it as much as I can now. And it's, man... There's so much going on in this scene. It's so fucking good. Because Sam Esmail, obviously, he's like a year older than me, I think. He's a Gen Xer also. So he's got it going on. He knows what this is about. He knows what Christian Slater means to us. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I'm going to take Christian Slater and I'm going to make him fulfill that thing that you thought he was about in the early 90s. But Christian Slater's performance is so good. I love the sincerity with which he delivers all these lines. It's just so fucking good. Because it's in the hands of a lesser actor, no way would this shit work. Christian Slater sells it 100%. And even on the rewatches, knowing what I know about the relationship between Mastermind and Mr. Robot, I'm on Mr. Robot's wagon, man. 100% on that wagon. It's fucking amazing. Ellie asks him, "Who are you?" And I love the whole, that'll come later. He knows that Elliot has to unpeel these layers of his psyche. Yeah, that'll come later. Okay, so Elliot makes his way back. He's obviously, no pun intended, in two minds at this point about whether he should get on Mr. Robot's wagon or whether he should betray Mr. Robot. Now, the choice of music here, this Neil Diamond song, I fucking love this, man. You could have chosen any kind of music for this, and they all would have had different meanings. And I love the choice of Neil Diamond because it's the last thing you would expect. But yet, the lyrics are so perfect. And it's the first in a long line of musical choices we'll see in this show where it's a really unexpected aesthetic choice. But the lyrics, man, especially on the rewatch, you're like, oh, I see what Sam was doing here.
When you've got someone as talented as Matt Quayle doing your soundtrack, you probably don't need to put in pop songs, but every episode there's some brilliant choice that just fits
it draws your attention to the fact that when they're using catalogue music, as it were, it's got to be for a specific purpose, And the choices of the show are they're always great, but on this first episode, I feel like this is a mission statement almost, because he goes on to use this kind of thing again and again. And while it's playing, we get the montage of Elliot going back to his apartment. He goes and he looks up Angela's student debt, which she did mention at the start of the episode. So Esmail has already planted that seed in her mind that she's having trouble repaying her student debts. He also looks at news stories about the poverty gap being wider than ever. So this is all... It's like, what's Elliot going to do? Is he going to shop this guy? Or is he going to get on this guy's wagon? And on the rewatch, it's like, the mind is already made up. You know, it can only go one way. Nonetheless, though, the way it ensues is amazing.
He just needs that one little push.
Yes, and I don't know about you, but see on this rewatch particularly, I think I appreciated this all the more than I've ever done. The subtlety in the way this is put together is amazing. So we get the E-Corps meeting. Terry Colby and his crew come in just to get the lowdown on what happened with the hack. Because it was Angela's responsibility, she has to report first. Terry Colby is a complete fucking douchebag to Angela.
So Terry Colby's line about the gals in analysis
says
so much about his character that 1,000 lines couldn't cover as well as that one little sentence.
It does. And what I like particularly about that line is that's 100% true to real life. That's the kind of shit guys say in these positions. They just talk like that. None of this seems forced. None of it seems ridiculous. That's just how these shitbags talk.
When he's nitpicking her time, when she says, like, the night instead of the morning.
Yes. Yep.
The MVP in this scene for me is Portia Doubleday. Because
she's great. Yep.
Her facial expression of someone who's having to sit there and eat this shit sandwich, and, like, knowing that she has to keep any sort of semblance of her job, she has to basically play along with this shit show, right up to the point where she knows she's getting sacked off.
100%.
Her facial expressions, man, it's fucking heartbreaking.
I love the moment where Elliot decides to swap the folders. So good. I think I appreciated that on this rewatch way more than at any other time. The way it's done is just so... And the shift in Rami Malek's performance at that point, so good. Because the way he delivers the line, once you decrypt it, you'll know where the hack came from. He's got that glint in his eye, so good.
Yeah, there's no apprehension in his tone or anything anymore. He's just like, yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's it exactly. Because before that, when he was trying to stick up for Angela, there was the bit of the stammering. But when he delivers that line, no, mastermind, back in control. You're getting fucked, guys. So good. When I've been thinking about this show previously, trying to kind of map out a timeline, albeit I wasn't trying to do it all that seriously prior.
Yep.
It's only on this rewatch that I'm trying to be a bit more specific about it because we are now podcasting about it. Elliot does tell us loud and clear here, 19 days pass and nothing happens. He doesn't give us a date when this starts, but it is early 2015.
Yeah.
So there's like 3 weeks past now, and he's not heard from Angela, and nothing has happened. And I picked up on that detail this time around because the timing of everything in Mr. Robot, because of the way things go down in future seasons, I become a bit obsessed with, okay, when did things actually happen? And it's on this rewatch, I'm like, okay, 19 days passed, that's important to note. So we are early in 2015 when this first shit happens. I do feel there's a conundrum about that, though, which I'm going to mention, if not in this episode, maybe another episode. But it's something that does bother me a wee bit because I can't quite get my head around it. But anyway, I'll leave it for the moment. I'm going to say, though, we move on. Elliot returns to Fun Society, finds it deserted. Now, at this point, this show could easily go back to Hack of the Week. This show could easily go back to Elliot just doing another Ron's Coffee Shop, week on week. And every now and again, it references Fun Society. And it could be the equivalent of X-Files, What Happened to Mulder's Sister.
Yeah, or Fun Society become the smoking man.
It could have easily become that. And even at this point, when I first watched the show, even though, I knew I was watching it in the age of quote-unquote prestige TV, part of me was like, it could still go that way. I just was not sure what I was watching at that point. I almost feel like Sam Esmail was kind of teasing us with that possibility. Like, we'll get back to that at some point. But let's go back to Elliot hacking Michael, because that is what we get next. Elliot goes back to hacking Michael. Because he's so restless by this point, because nothing has happened. He's like, well, I'll go back to what I was doing. Can't find a password from the info that he has available from Michael. Gets very frustrated. But he does realise that Michael's using a false name. He's not really called Michael. We get a great voiceover during this whole montage where he's looking at the people. He's looking at Angela's social media. He's looking at Krista's social media. Man, I love this stuff. He says, what I wouldn't give to be normal. He says this over the montage of their social media accounts. He justifies his hacking activity as being keeping their optimism intact. Can I just say, even after everything this show does, I think that statement is true to the end, and I find that so fucking impressive.
He's the silent guardian. He's the hero
Right,
that
exactly,
they need, but not the
exactly.
one they deserve.
Right, exactly. The more the show went on, I was like, well, anything's up for grabs. Anything can happen. Anything I thought about Elliot could turn out to be untrue. And he revealed a lot of things about Elliot in his various versions. But along the way, none of this became untrue. And it still became it still ended up a challenging and satisfying show. And man, I don't know how he did it. I'm so glad this show. It makes me so happy this show exists. And once again, you can put in the Craig filleting Sam Esmail klaxon.
Yep.
Guys, I'm sorry, but I can't help it. This is the best written show I've ever watched. So Elliot goes to confront quote-unquote Michael, not his real name. Elliot smoking a cigarette. We don't see Elliot smoking a cigarette very often at all. And it seems to me this is a mastermind affectation.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, I think what I like about it is it's once again feeding into that cliche about what a cool hero looks like.
Yeah.
When he's confronting Michael, he's not vaguely awkward. He's 100% confident. It's like, I am going to take you down. So stop seeing Krista, or I will tell her everything about your wife, the escorts, the one who was 15, although she wasn't really 15, but he tells the convincing lie because he knows, quote-unquote, Michael has a proclivity for younger-looking women. All of this, he's so confident all the way through it that it does seem like a different character. And it's another example of where, one of the first few times I was watching this, why did I not pick up on this detail?
It's so obvious that it's a different character.
Definitely. He has the line, Krista needs to avoid dickheads like you, her radar needs fixing. Again, it's another thing, it's had two edges to it, because yes, he does want to help Krista, but the reason he wants to help Krista is because he knows that Krista can help him. And I think that's one of the things I did not entirely appreciate in the first viewing, but he knows that because Elliot comes across as so cynical in certain ways when you're first watching this, you're not sure, even though he respects Krista, you're not entirely sure how much he values her actual therapy per se. But it's looking back now, you can see, no, he did always value Krista's therapy. He knew that she was on the right track to kind of helping him out.
Yeah.
Her radar needs fixing. I think that line speaks volumes now. Anyway, I need something from you. He says to Michael. He means the dog. And I love he takes Flipper home. Again, it's a great example of Sam Esmail just writing something and not making it super loud. He just wanted the dog not to have the abuse. And I love the line. It's so understated. He says, I like you, Flipper. You're cool.
Yeah, it's so nice. But also it does that, like, it does telegraph the point that this is the hero. He saves the abused dog.
Yeah,
in case anyone who was
100%.
watching it was under any doubt, it's your boy.
It's your boy. Your boy, Elliot. So we get the first mention here of Elliot's digital cemetery, and I love that fucking phrase. So it's everyone he's hacked and that he's made full use of. That's it. They're done. They are deleted. They go into the digital cemetery. I meant to make note of what album Michael got. Did you notice what it was? Was it a Pink Floyd album?
I think is it not the, is it the Wish You Were Here? He
Yeah,
gets.
okay, well, that
There's
makes
someone
sense.
gets Pink Floyd. And
Yeah, as someone who hates Pink Floyd, I'm happy for Michael to get. So I've just offended all the Pink Floyd fans. That's another demographic who won't be tuning in again.
there's another 7 of our Twitter followers gone. Thanks for that, Craig.
I'm sorry, guys.
Look, guys, come back. I actually quite like Pink Floyd. It's one of our major sources of disagreement. I saved our listeners. Carry on.
I'm glad you're doing that work. You're the hero we need. Krista, understandably looking sad, but Elliot feeling quite confident he did the right thing. And I have to say, as a viewer, feeling quite confident he did the right thing. But it's sad to see Krista sad, I have to say. And Elliot's clearly feeling that as well. So there is that residual guilt. He admits to Krista that he's frustrated because Angela will not respond to his text. Krista encourages him to talk to her as a real interaction, as in away from the keyboard. So there's a lot of metaphor going on there. Obviously, Elliot decides, okay, I will go and do that. So all safe. He confronts Angela. Angela says she was purely embarrassed, and that's the reason she didn't talk to him. Now, I feel like this is an important beat for Angela's character. And on the rewatch, I'm actually surprised that this happened so early in the show, because it always seemed to me prior that this happened later. But this is the first sign of we're getting a real handle on Angela's character. Like, she will not be saved. She saves herself.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's such an honest way that she says it as well in that episode. Like, her response isn't remotely unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing, I think on my first watch of the show, I just sort of glossed over. And I think it's easy to gloss over it because it just seems like what happens next overshadows it in terms of how you perceive the show. But looking at it now, it's like, no, this is a real statement by the character of Angela. This is her telling us this is what she's all about. This is never mentioned in the pilot episode, but we learn in the coming episodes that, like Elliot, she also had a parent who died as a result of the E-core chemical leak, and that comes to be her mission. And so when she says here, if I'm going down kind of thing, just let me go down, because it's my failing, it's not yours. If I'm going to win, it's because I've won and not you. I mean, she doesn't say it in those words, but that's essentially what she says. And when you look at her trajectory through the rest of the series, it makes perfect sense.
The pilot gives us several mission statements for characters like that, and it sticks with them. They'll grow, you'll learn more about them, but at their core, this is who they are right now, and this is why you're going to fall in love with this show and fall in love with these characters.
Yeah, 100%.
It just does such a good job of that.
Yeah. So Elliot leans in for the hug, and this is notable because we already know from the course of this pilot episode alone that Elliot does not like to be touched particularly. He did have sexual activities with Shayla, so we already know he's able to put up with it in certain circumstances, but the way in which he dives in for this hug speaks so many volumes. And so it's clear, if we didn't already know it, the bond he has with Angela at this point, it's clear that Angela is a very special person in his life. At this point, we still do not get any hint there's a romantic feeling between Elliot and Angela. Sam Esmail is keeping that close to his chest at this point. And I really admire the way he's done that, because, can I say, by the way, when you do have a close friend and you do have that romantic inclination towards them, there is always the dichotomy of, do I make something of this and potentially change your relationship forever, or do I not mention it and just continue to be great friends?
When you get older, you just make a podcast with them.
Oh, James. So Elliot leans in for the hug. They have the hug. There is this moment where it seems one or the other might say a thing, but it's interrupted by news report. Terry Colby has been arrested as being responsible for the hack on E-core.
And we get the best gif ever.
And we get the CBT mantra.
Yep.
Elliot starts repeating to himself, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening. I love that. He runs out into Times Square. We get the classic gif, as you said, of him raising his arms, victorious. Amazing. So good. And if this was the Hacker of the Week show, the superhero vigilante show, that's where that would end.
Yep.
But instead,
We get
what happens is
the Men in Black.
the Men in Black turn up and say, could you step inside the car, please, sir? Which to this day, I'm just like, that is so good. That's so clever. So Mr. X, as we will come to know him as.
Yep, Mr. Sutherland, a.k.a. Mr. X, a.k.a. Jeremy Home.
I love that guy. He's so good.
Remind me at some point when we're doing another Mr. Robot episode to just espouse at great length about the night I stayed up really late to watch an Instagram live chat featuring Jeremy Home and Stephanie Corneliuson, because that was adorable as fuck.
Yeah. He's a good man. He's a good guy. He's really good with the fan base as well. He's totally into it. But yeah, I love his performance here. I love how straight-faced he is. It's like, step inside the car, and Elliot's just like, what the fuck is going on? And he's just like, no, step inside the car, please. And then they're in the elevator together when they get to the E-core building. It's like, you can go out now. So good. Like, Elliot is just fucking man on the moon, not knowing what is going on, thinking to himself, this episode should have ended 5 minutes ago. And I love, as he's approaching this boardroom will, of course, take on a certain significance in season 4, which, again, Craig filleting Sam Esmail collection. I love the way that he made this an icon in the final season, because the symbolism of this room, this is a place where negotiations happen. And so this is the place where, after Elliot has this experience, it's where all of his personalities gather in his mind to have the power play, essentially. So how are we going to settle this kind of thing? It's a fucking stroke of genius. It's really so clever. And considering the entire anti-capitalist kind of theme of the show, the fact that all of that takes place in the most uber-capitalist environment, it's amazing, man. It's so good. But anyway, Elliot eventually staggers out the elevator towards the room, and I love the way this is edited together. We get the glimpses of the guys in the room, and it mirrors exactly the shots we've seen earlier in the episode of the secret cabal in charge of society, the invisible hand. So it's kind of feeding all that back into us that this is the upper echelons of evil as far as Elliot is concerned. And then we get the final shot, zooming on Tyrell. Remember this guy? Bonsoir, Elliot. Man.
Chills.
Is there any more perfect way to end a pilot episode?
Everything coming round in circles from the start, when you've got the board and his first words are hello friend, and then you've got like the board at the end and bonsoir, Elliot.
Bonsoir, Elliot. Yep. Amazing. We did not speak on this too much earlier, but Martin Wallstrom, amazing casting. Such good casting. That dude looks like a fucking vampire, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. He's a seriously handsome dude.
He is
but
alien
he looks like
handsome.
A fucking alien. Yes, yeah, exactly.
Which is why later on when we meet his wife, who also is like alien beautiful.
Stephanie Cornelissen, 100% the female counterpart. Yeah, absolutely. They're both sort of reptilian and remote, but both strikingly good looking individuals, but both have that sort of very Aryan look about them. Very pale skinned, very blue eyes.
Yeah, they are both Scandinavian. There's like Stephanie Cornelisson's Danish, and Martin Wallstrom, I believe, is Swedish.
Yeah. Both so superbly cast, and they're both amazing in this. But the visual contrast with Elliot, of course, who's Egyptian American. He's got the same blue eyes as Tyrell, which I think and they make a point of highlighting Rami Malek's blue eyes quite a lot to draw the link visually between him and Tyrell. But the racial discrepancy is there. There's just so much going on between these two characters visually that the script has to do so little work. It's all in the visuals. It's great filmmaking, amazing filmmaking. So when you first watched this episode, when this episode ended, what was going through your mind?
Well, first time I watched it, I had the ability to immediately watch the next episode, and I did.
Same. Yeah. But I did have that. I did have that brief sort of, man, this show is something else. I don't feel like this is what I expected I was getting into.
It was not what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a cleverly written Hacker of the Week show, and immediately I was like, oh, okay, let's see where this goes. Unfortunately, though, Craig, by the end of that, I've still had no word back from Sam Esmail on who owns the jet.
Well, we will update you on the next episode, I'm sure.
We will find a way.
You'll all be waiting with bated breath about that particular nugget of Mr. Robot obscure detail.
One of two things will happen. I'll either find out or I'll have been blocked on Twitter by Sam Esmail.
Man, if you see some of the yahoos in his comments, I don't think you have any legitimate fear of being blocked. As I linked to you earlier, Sam Esmail had posted earlier today the most outlandish and outrageous statement that you will ever hear, I'm sure, for delicate ears, delicate, fragile snowflake ears. It was thus. Real quick, if you're an anti-masker, anti-vaxxer, and/or QAnon believer, then you're stupid as fuck. I don't know about you, James, that seems a fair enough comment.
It seems like a pretty standard statement, yeah.
I am not going to shock you by telling you this. It has elicited some outrage amongst the comments.
Almost as if some people are willing to tell Sam Esmail what the characters in his show would have thought.
For the benefits of the listeners, I did screenshot one particular comment that really made me chuckle in response to this, where one user says, Elliot Alderson would have been 2/3 of those. parentheses, anti-vaxxer, or QAnon believer, close parentheses. Imagine misunderstanding a TV show so much that you then have to lecture the creator of the show about what the show was about. What a maroon, as Bugs Bunny would say.
What a zero.
Or should I say, as Mr. Robot would say. That brings us to the end of our first rewatch deep dive of the sheer pleasure that is revisiting Mr. Robot. If you are a super fan of Mr. Robot, which I assume you are, like us, otherwise why the fuck would you have endured this long? Then thank you for listening. We will get back to this as soon as we can. I guess we're going to do this intermittently between other things.
Yeah, be sure to join us next time where we're going to be talking about Lovecraft Country.
Yes, we both watched the first episode of Lovecraft Country this week. I'd say, certainly for me, and my feelings coming away from it were pretty positive.
We will have 2 episodes worth to debate on our next recording.
Yeah, by the time we get to podcast again, there will have been 2 episodes. So, yeah, that'll give us plenty to talk about. So, if you are digging that show, then please come along, come back, visit us, and dig it with us, because I think we're going to have a good time talking about it. There's a lot I'd like to say about that show. But yeah, I feel pretty positive about it so far, so I'm looking forward to talking about it. Our Mr. Robot rewatch commentary, we will get back to intermittently, so that's something we're going to do in between other stuff, so please do stick with us.
I guarantee, if you're only here for the Mr. Robot commentary, you'll hear more shortly.
Yeah, we cannot shut up about Mr. Robot, so don't worry about that.
If you want to hear Craig filleting Sam Esmail, you're in the right place, my friend.
Yes, yeah, that's going on my gravestone.
We will see you next time on fSobriety.
I think that's what this one is. We've done so many podcasts tonight, I forget.
I don't know how we sign off.
I believe this one is fSobriety. James, before we go, I do have to ask you the compelling question, which I know all the listeners are dying to know.
What's that?
What have you been drinking tonight?
Oh, tonight I've been paying homage to the Tron. Shout out to the Tron, not the Hamiltron, the other one.
Hamiltron, the other one.
By drinking Green King East Coast IPA.
Oh, excellent, and always an excellent choice. I have been swigging me some Casillero del Diablo, Shiraz from Argentina. Cannot say enough good words about Casillero del Diablo. Get it down, ye. Which, now, by the way, I don't think many high-class winemakers advertise their produce that way. I feel if they did, they'd break into a whole new market. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to speak to the common man, to say, see that Shiraz? Get it down ye.
And if you can't get it down ye, get it up ye.
And on that note, I think that's half the ball.
fSobriety, Episode 2, I Hope You're Hearing This Too, was conceived and recorded by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors, from the album Lease of Life, available on Rock Action Records. Check out fSobriety on Twitter, at fSobrietycast, on Facebook at facebook.com/fSobrietypodcast, or on youtube.com/fSobrietypodcast.